Good evening, councillors. The meeting is now live.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting, both on the internal Teams and on the live stream. As everyone will be aware, we continue to meet in a virtual format, no longer as a matter of the law, but because of the practical difficulties of doing so in another fashion at the moment, which may create in turn its own technical difficulties. And so please do bear with us if we have any technical issues with the feed or the stream at this stage. My name is Councillor Peter Graham. I'm the chairman of the committee. I would also like to welcome 4 new members of the committee, who are Councillor Denfield, Councillor Forbes, Councillor Graham, Angela Graham, and Councillor Wintle, who are extremely welcome. Also in attendance is the Cabinet Member for Housing and Regeneration, Councillor Caddy, and Mrs Price, who is Vice Chairman of the BRF. I understand that Councillors Belton and McKinney are also present because of their request to speak on the Regeneration reports, and we will get to the point of the committee's discussion on their request to speak when we reach those reports. I am not aware of any apologies from members of the committee at this stage. Also, I've been asked to say that, or point out that you should have all read the guidance provided on virtual meetings, and please could people follow the conduct for remote meetings suggested within that guidance. And one particular point that is made and which is helpful is if members and others who are contributing could refer to the page number at the top of the agenda and the paragraph when they're referencing matters within these reports, so that members of the public can follow our debates. Please also ensure your microphone is turned off unless you are speaking. So we have a number of officers present who will introduce themselves when they address the committee. And I think at this point, we turn to declarations of interest. So does any member wish to declare either a personal or prejudicial interest in any matter before the committee this evening? I'll take Councillor Denfield first, as I can see him.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. It relates to the gold paper. Would you rather I email it to you?
If you have an interest you wish to declare, you should declare it now.
Sure.
I should just say, for the committee's reference, it's not necessarily the case that we will debate the gold paper. If we do so, we will do so in closed session. So obviously people should not say anything in relation to that paper at the moment, although actually there's much more within it that we can discuss than might have appeared. So that will be clarified when we get to the item. So I'm hoping we don't have to go into closed session, but if you have a declaration of interest, it should be declared now.
So the interest is that I work for Pinsent Masons, providing procurement law advice, which is relevant for that paper.
Thank you. I think I also saw Councillor MacLeod.
I'm a council tenant.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, I'm a landlord in Wandsworth. That's my first one. And the second one is that I'm director of a residents association, Heritage Park in
Thank you. I've still seen that somebody else has got their hand raised, but it's quite difficult for me to work out who it is. I think it is Councillor Lure. So, Councillor Lure.
Right, Councillor Graham, yes, I am also a leaseholder in Wandsworth.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations
Yes,
of
there is.
interest?
Sorry,
Yes.
I had my hand up. You probably haven't seen it.
It's difficult for me to see because I'm on the iPad, I'm afraid. So yes,
fine.
just
Okay,
please
thank
butt
you.
in if you've got any further ones.
Sure. I'm a leaseholder on the York Road estate, which is part of paper 20244, and I'm also the administrator for Big Local SW11, and there are some inaccurate statements in on that paper.
Okay, we'll deal with the potential inaccuracies when we get to that point.
Sure.
But it's just taking the declarations at this stage.
Thank you.
But that's noted, and we'll definitely come to that in due course.
Thank you.
Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor White, I think there was a mention earlier, which you may or may not find relevant, that apparently you've got something to do with crew, and you might want to mention that in relation to the Wes paper, but I'll leave that at your discretion. I can't hear you at the moment.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, I am a member of crew, but I'll say I'm not sure that they'll be mentioned in the Wes paper, but they've certainly been involved with the council as far as the Wes is concerned.
Okay, well, I mean, we've sort of flushed it out by saying that anyway, but if you wish to declare it, you can. If you don't wish to, it's a matter for you.
I've just declared it, I think.
Excellent. Very good. Right. In which case we move on to item 2, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of June 2020. I will take a general silence or lack of protest as confirmation, but does the committee agree that the minutes of our previous meeting are a correct and accurate record, and may I sign them as such, presumably virtually sign them at this stage? Is that acceptable? Good.
Agreed.
Excellent. In which case, we move on to item 3, which is the Borough Residents Forum. I would just point out for newer members of the committee that the Borough Residents Forum takes some of the papers that come to this meeting. Our convention has been that the items that are covered later in our own meeting, we don't seek to discuss at this point unless there's a particular BRF angle to it, that we discuss the issues that were raised there that have also come to us when they come to us later in the agenda. So with that said, Mrs. Price, do you have any comments on the report?
I have no comments on the paper as presented, but if members have any questions for me, I'm willing to answer them.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this report? No. Very good.
Thank you.
In which case, I take it that we can receive the report as information. Good. So we move in that case to item 4, which is the fire safety update paper, and I think that Ms. Willman is going to say a few words to introduce the paper. Ms. Willman.
Hello, everybody. So this paper gives, we've historically reported quite regularly to committee on fire safety since Grenfell, and this provides an update both on what's happening nationally with central government and a bit of an update on what we're doing within Wandsworth as well. So currently, in July, the government published the fire safety consultation. The important bit really for us in housing is section 2, which is about the recommendations in the Grenfell inquiry phase 1 and how housing can implement those. The consultation ends in October, so we'll be responding via standing order, but that will be made available, our responses. In addition to the fire safety consultation, the government has also published the draft safety bill, which is going through Parliament, which is implementing all the recommendations that came out of the Hackett review. So that's much more strategically about how we're going to implement building safety. It covers the golden thread of information, how you have compliant information in a BIM system, which is a building information management system. And it also looks at how we manage our high-rise blocks. So in Hackett, that's 18 metres and above. The paper also covers a bit about our role on the early adopters. So we're one of 4 local authorities on the early adopters, which is led by the MHCLG, which is a group looking at how local authorities, housing association, developers, the building sector will implement the Hackett review. So the idea is it's a group of people who are influencing how Hackett is going to be implemented before it comes into legislation. And we're currently taking part in 2 trials on that. One's called the Mandatory Occurrence Reporting Trial, which will be relevant in the development and the occupation stage of a building, but we're doing it in the development stage. So that is basically a set of building safety concerns that would automatically have to be raised in the development phase. So that's only just started this week. The other one is working with the Health and Safety Exec, which are going to be one of the regulators of building safety. And we're working with them on developing a risk prioritisation tool. So basically, everybody with blocks 18 stories and above will have to do a building safety case, and they're saying when we're set up, we can't deal with thousands of building safety cases all at once. So we're working with them on how you would prioritise which one's the most important. So, for example, by height, numbers of means of escape. And again, that's very early stages. We've just been providing some data for that. It also gives a short update on the 2 blocks where we've done remediation works, where we've removed non-compliant ACM cladding, and that's Castlemaine and Sudbury House. Both have been delayed slightly due to COVID, but are due to be complete in autumn this year. The appendix attached covers the main points of the consultation around the Grenfell recommendations, but the big one that we've covered in here is about inspections of front entrance doors and communal doors. And you'll see in paragraph 11 what the consultation is recommending on inspection of doors. We feel like that is a very intensive work, and we will be responding in the consultation to say that we really think a 12-month annual check will be adequate. There's just a bit of information that I've just summarised briefly on the building safety bill and the implications for us. And then I think that's about it, really. So, and open to any questions, really. I mean, and we will also be, as we move further along in the process on fire safety, we'll be reporting to further committees too.
Thank you. Could members that wish to speak, rather than raising their hands, which I have difficulty seeing more than one of those at a time, put a queue in the comments. But if anybody wants to wave at me now, because nobody's done that so far, they can also do so. So, Councillor Graham.
Somebody loves us. My question is about paragraph 10 on page 7. Pages seeking to clarify the relationship between FCOs and housing, but also private housing. But we've also got private housing where people rent in any case. And I'm just wondering where we stand with that, what with the main entrances and the communal areas, but also how are we going to educate or inform estate agents? I mean, I think that's, as we all know, that some rented properties are very, shall we say, front doors are not very safe. And I just think that's
okay.
Something.
Can we take that point? And I say I should probably explain to new members committee that my general tack is to allow people to ask more than one question, but keep their questions pointed. And if we get to one point, we'll go for a response, and then we'll allow you back in if you wish to follow up on it or ask something else. But there's a question, so can we have an answer on that one?
I can answer that. I'm not sure if Mr. Stewart will want to add anything. So obviously we've got a high percentage of leaseholders. We're about 50% tenanted, 50% leasehold. On our blocks of 10 stories and over, we've already been inspecting. So the area teams have been going out inspecting front entrance doors, but both leasehold and tenant. Obviously with the tenanted one, we can carry out the repairs. With the leaseholder, there are conditions in the lease that say they need to, that they're responsible for the front entrance doors. The vast majority of leases, it's the leaseholder's responsibility. So we would work with the leaseholders there to ensure that they renew their front entrance doors where required. I mean, ultimately, we can take legal action, but obviously that's not what we want to do. We would work with leaseholders, give them reasonable timeframes to get this done. I mean, that would include leaseholders that sublet their property. So those people who are then renting privately from leaseholders.
My second question, and thank you for that clarity, is that actually where do the private landlords who rent properties stand as their responsibility, as we are doing? And also estate agents surely must have their own information and teachings on the process of Grenfell. There must be an impact, a safety impact on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if somebody in the private sector housing team wants to answer specifically on private blocks.
Yes, Chair, if you're happy for me to pick up on the private sector element.
Please do.
Yeah, so my name is Chris Nash. I'm the Residential and Pollution Manager for the RSP, who look after the private sector housing function for Wandsworth Borough Council. In short, each private block is subject to the Housing Act and what we call the Housing Health and Safety Rating System inspection. So where there is a deficiency, which is usually on the protective means of escape, for example, we are able to take action and work with landlords in the first instance to do that. And we continue to do that on all blocks, whether they be 18 metres or simply 2 metres. It's part of our day-to-day enforcement function.
Thank you. I think I saw Councillor Wintle as the next. Councillor Wintle.
Hello, thank you. First question, and it relates to private housing as well, is for an update on cladding on private blocks.
Sorry, you've muted suddenly, Councillor Wintle. Do you want to unmute?
Oh, I didn't. Somebody must have muted me. So yes, if we could have an update on what the cladding position is in the borough on some of the private blocks, because I know we did have some, and what the council's doing to ensure that private block cladding is being removed, and where we can, what our powers are to enforce that.
Thank you. Mr. Nash.
Yeah, sure. Happy to take an update on that one. So it's quite pertinent. So we've had a recent meeting with multi-agency meeting with the London Fire Brigade, with the MHCLG, with the LGA, the HSE and other parties, including the Home Office, to work out a plan of action for the remaining properties that are broadly, I think they're around the 12 remaining. Only 4 are of particular interest to the Ministry, those being Copperlight, Aurora, Parkside St Peters and Sesame Apartments. Those are the key 4 of the highest risk. There is a plan in place for each of those properties, which is a mixture between joint inspections using the resource at the Local Government Association and working with those developers. So one thing that has been put in place over the recent months is a subsidiary called Faithful and Gould, who work alongside MHCLG to help those developers who are dragging their heels, so to speak, come up with a schedule of works in time for delivery within the next 12 months. There is an absolute deadline that has been set by the Ministry and through Lord Greenall of December 2021, and we'll be working hard with those private developments to make sure that timescale is stuck to and work out a plan with those multi-agency partners.
I can confirm it definitely prefers it pronounced greenhouse, but yes.
Greenhouse,
exactly
my apologies, Chair.
I've known him for many years. Right, Councillor Forbes, I think you were next.
Hi, thank you. Just regarding paragraph 12 on page 8, the talk around the frequency of the inspections and how it would be difficult to achieve that with current resources. I'm just wondering what sort of additional resources would be required. Is there a ballpark cost in mind?
Okay.
Councillor, perhaps I can take this. It's Ian Stewart.
Yes, of course.
Housing Management. Well, at the moment, it's just consultation, so we don't know what frequency they're going to require these inspections, but I think the MHCLG are aware that to try and hit the frequency that is required by, well, it's been recommended by Grenfell, is impractical and has a very large cost attached to it. We haven't quantified that yet. There is work being done with London councils, and there'll be further updates on this, but we're at the early stages of consultation at the moment, so we'll be coming back with further reports on this.
Okay, thank you. In which case, shall we move to Councillor McDermott?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to see Wandsworth, as usual, is leading the way with housing and putting itself forward as an early adopter. Perhaps you can just fill me in on what benefits we'll have by being an early adopter. And just out of interest, there are 3 other local authorities. Do we know if they're sort of spread around the country in different situations to give us sort of broad spread of information from the early adopters?
Chairman, perhaps it's Brian Riley here. Perhaps I could help with this one. Yes, the early adopters, so named, were set up about 22 months ago, and it was sadly evident initially that there were no local authorities involved at all, despite the fact that we obviously manage the majority of social housing in the country. So it was made up of developers and housing associations. Wandsworth, through its role with the Association of Retained Council Housing, highlighted that omission and wrote to the early adopters, and after a period of time, gradually, I think they began to realise the kind of error of their way, that there would be very little point designing a system that didn't include councils. So Manchester, Birmingham, Camden and ourselves were then selected. It is quite a significant undertaking, both in terms of time and complexity, but from my perspective, I would far rather be in the dialogue and shaping the future of what is an increasingly complicated method of managing, maintaining and building homes than having it imposed on us at a later date. So I'm very pleased that we were selected. I think it's a kind of a badge of honour that our authority was considered to be one that they wanted an opinion from, and that they value that opinion, and we will continue to do our best to make sense of what's a very complex and changing environment.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. That's great.
Thank you. I think Councillor White was next.
Hi, yeah, and I'm quite pleased we're an early adopter as well, because I think that we've really got to crack on and do this. So I'm quite pleased that we've stepped up as well. And I think it's a relief to many Wandsworth residents as well that we're taking that line.
Sorry, you've gone to mute. I'm not quite sure why that's happened, but you've gone to mute. I can confirm I'm not responsible because I have an iPad, so you can see what I'm doing to it.
Sorry, okay. Sorry, I recognise this is a general paper, but there's no mention of checks for possible undermining of compartmentalisation. So, you know, check the window encasements and the fan extractors, for instance, that you know, might have been undermining. And then with lifts as well, there's no mention about secondary power supply and water ingress protection and lift landing door performance compliance as examples of that. I mean, obviously, I'm not expecting everything to be in this paper, but, you know, are we sort of covering all of those type of areas?
Who'd like to respond to that? Mr.
I could say that the fire safety bill will require fire risk assessments to include external cladding systems, and should, as a matter of course, look at issues about compartmentation. So there's no one size fits all really, and no requirement. But a landlord will have to take all reasonable steps to ensure that compartmentation is not breached within its blocks. And key to that would be front entrance doors that are non-compliant. So, as I said before, it's early days, and we need to see where this goes. Certainly, lifts is also picked up, but these are technical details that we haven't gone into at this point, and they will follow on.
Thank you.
That's fine, thanks.
Councillor White, I think also at BRF you expressed a concern that some of these measures might be being introduced too soon. Is that something that you want to elaborate on, or are you now happy about that?
I didn't say that at the BRF. It
I'm
was
sorry,
mentioned
if I've misinterpreted that, I apologise.
It was mentioned at the BRF, but no, I feel that we've got to crack on. We've been moaning about it, Peter, for such a long time that we can't moan now that we're going to crack on with it. So.
Very good. I'm glad we're all in agreement on this one. It's helpful. Councillor Dawson.
Sorry, mine was also about the early adopters, so I was very pleased to hear Mr. Riley's response. It just allays any concerns when people express them about why are we getting in at the front, and I think the rationale was very cogent and one I'd totally support.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to say anything on this paper? Yes, Councillor Denfield.
Thank you. This is a sort of follow on from Councillor Forbes' question on paragraph 12 again. It says that the response to the consultation will be to suggest that resident front door entrance checks should be done every 12 months instead of every 6, because doing it every 6 is not really feasible. It's difficult to achieve with current resources. My concern there is that that's the tail wagging the dog, in that you're driving the standard of fire safety checks according to the budget you have rather than the other way round. And if the response to the consultation says that without having the counter proposal, which is we could deliver every 6 months if we had a budget of X, which I don't think we can say at the moment, because the answer to Councillor Forbes' question was that we don't have that figure at the moment, then that seems to be driving the wrong direction for me. I would rather a response dealt with the standard on the basis of its efficacy rather than its cost.
Okay, let's get an answer on that, and then I'll let you back in if necessary.
Yes, perhaps we got that emphasis wrong. I mean, currently we have to get into every tenanted property every year to service gas boilers. That in itself is a a huge task with lots of residents refusing access, requiring us to take legal action. That doesn't involve leaseholders, so if you double that amount of work, just the logistics of trying to get into every property every 6 months, irrespective of cost, I don't think it's practically deliverable, and we'll be making that point in the consultation response. So yes, cost shouldn't be seen as the driving force here. It's really about what's practically deliverable day to day.
Thank you. Councillor Denford.
Just as a follow-up to that, wouldn't more staff members enable you to meet that 6 months time schedule?
It would certainly assist us, but we know what problems we have in practical terms in getting into tenanted properties where they're required to give access. And bearing in mind that some landlords don't actually have a right of access at the moment to leasehold properties. So there's a big question here, and at some point we're going to arrive at a compromise that is deliverable and doesn't compromise fire safety. So I don't have an easy answer for that one. We're just going to have to work our way through it and come to hopefully the MHCLG will come to a view that's what is deliverable within a reasonable budget.
I think I could just add, perhaps it's Brian Riley again, that our view is that an annual inspection is proportionate to the risk. It isn't simply an issue of resource and logistics, is that we feel that level of inspection of front doors to get in to inspect to ensure that they are safe on an annual basis is a reasonable way to manage the risk within our stock. Boiler servicing, for instance, is an annual task. You could do it on a monthly basis if you had sufficient resource, but that isn't a proportionate way to manage the risk. So similarly with this inspection regime, that does require us to get in to make sure that the door closures are working. It can't be done externally, otherwise it would be far easier. But an annual inspection of the type described is a proportionate way of managing the risk involved, I think is our actual position on it.
And I suppose in relation to that although you wouldn't always pick up a defect visually, problems with doors are more easily visible than problems with boilers, say, and so there should be some visual warning of issues that will be picked up in routine inspections anyway.
Indeed so.
Okay, very good. If there's nothing else, and I do appreciate it's sometimes hard to see if anybody else wants to come in, I think as this paper is for information, I suggest that the committee should accept it. Are we all minded to accept this for information? Agreed? Excellent. Okay, in which case we turn to item 5, which is the Housing and Regeneration's contribution to the Wandsworth Environment and Sustainability Strategy, which for those watching online is normally shortened to the WES. So if you hear WES, that's what it means. Ms. Wilmot, would you like to say a few words to introduce this?
Hi. So the council as a whole in July 2019 declared a climate emergency, and this really is the first stage of a response from housing for how we're going to address this. So although this paper does briefly cover what Regeneration are doing and new build, information on energy efficiency around those schemes is in more detail in the reports they provide in those areas. So this really more covers what we're looking to do in our existing stock and the potential for retrofitting. So this is more setting the scene for what we need to know before we know what we're going to do, basically. So talking about doing a stock condition survey to understand properly the condition of our stock, commissioning, which is a recommendation, commissioning a consultant to do a survey of our stock to look at particular technologies and put forward what is sensible for us to do in our stock, so we can then put together a programme of works we're going to do. It also does cover a bit about what we currently do. So, for example, we're doing a feasibility study for ground source heat pumps on the Fitzhugh. It covers what we do with LED lighting. Obviously, we've got a major works programme where we're doing big major works schemes like roof and window renewals, which will always be to higher building regulations than they currently are, so they in themselves are then more energy efficient. It covers a bit about how we will communicate and engage with residents on what they can do, and also how we can work with them on energy efficiency, and also touches on areas of fuel poverty and work that we still need to do around that. There's also a little bit around funding, so it's quite brief in this report, but at the moment there's various funding streams coming out from central government and the GLA. We've recently done a bid with central policy where housing's element was only fairly small because the money had to be spent by 31st of March, but we've put in to do some retrofit works on a few houses, and if we get the funding for that, we will hopefully make those exemplars for how we can then roll that out across our stock. And I think I've covered it really. I've sort of come to an abrupt end there, sorry. But any questions? You're on mute, Councillor Graham.
Peter, you're on mute. Councillor Graham, you're on mute.
I've now unmuted myself. See, that we're all suffering from this. I was just trying to say that we don't need to have any more description than is necessary to cover the paper, and I think that covered it well. So thank you. Right, I will ask Miss Mary, Mrs. Price, if she wishes to say anything first, and I'll open it up to committee so our fathers could indicate in the comments whether they wish to ask questions. But Mrs. Price, do you have anything to raise?
Sorry, no, I haven't. Are we talking on paper 243?
Yes, that's right. So
yes, yeah. No, I have no comments, no.
Okay. In which case, are there other members of the committee that wish to come in? Councillor White.
Yes, thank you. And it's great to see this document come in front of the Housing Committee. And it's a long way from, from a year ago, never mind 2 years ago. So I think that the council are making a fairly decent strides here. But I mean, there's quite a lot of questions I'll probably ask to the officers directly. So I'll stick to a much more general question. I've got a couple of questions. I mean, the first one, it worries me that we're getting that we're not getting the technical input that we could have possibly. There are a lot of solutions missing. I know it's a general paper, but gas boilers are quoted in 2 places as part of the solution, which is worrying. And more passive solutions like thermal and smart technologies are mentioned. And I'm not sure what the SAPS N EPC rating we are aiming for in our buildings. That's not mentioned either. Let's take this ask the question. The question is, could we be using community groups and the many trailblazers available to inform our plan in a Wandsworth low carbon building task group, maybe?
Would this include the one you've declared an interest in, Councillor White?
It may or it may not do, Peter.
Very good. I'm glad you declared an interest in that case. Can we have an answer to that?
Yes, you can. So that is one of the recommendations, is because I think sometimes we've got a tendency to think that because climate change is such a big issue that everyone can just apply their common sense and we know how to resolve it. So one of the recommendations is that we will get a consultant in who is well versed in all these technologies, who can tell us what is sensible for our stock, because obviously retrofitting can be complicated, and what we don't want to say is, right, we're going to put PV panels on all our flat roofs. We want to have somebody who comes in, who's got the expertise, who can tell us what are the sensible things to do, what are the best things to do, and they will also, when they're doing that, they will look at what EPC rating they can get your stock to by doing various different technologies. So that is what we're doing, because I think we need to do that to inform what we're going to do going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Dawson, you had your...
Sorry, can I just come back? Just a very, very quick comeback on that, okay. just to clarify.
I'll give you a quick one.
You're talking about an individual. Would it be a task group that we'd be looking at?
Well, the commissioning somebody to do it is, we're going to commission a company to go out and do it, but there is no reason why in the future we can't have a working group or a focus group that's looking more broadly at what we can do around energy efficiency and housing.
Okay.
So I've got another question I'll ask, but I'll ask that later, Peter, if you want to come back to me.
No problem. Yeah, I will come back to you. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also very much welcome the paper and the tenor of the paper, and actually commend officers for maintaining a momentum on WES during recent months. Considering all the other pressures, I think again, we should recognise that. I just wanted to comment on paras 30 to 33, which is the communication and culture change, the engagement with residents when we move from dealing with the council aspect to them as individual residents. We really can't downplay at all, and I don't think we're planning to, but it is an incredibly difficult and also probably a very time-consuming effort that's going to be required to explain to people what can be done, how they can do it, where grants are available. And I just want to be reassured that all those aspects are being investigated.
Yes, so as you say, there are several different funding streams coming out of varying levels of complexity. So we work very closely with Central Policy because they've got a team who's leading on this. So, for example, they led on the most recent bid and we put something towards that. So a lot of the messaging will be for all residents and not just specific to council tenants, and we will tap into that resource in Central Policy and make sure we have that message going out to council residents too. I do think it's a good idea to have a working group or a focus group where we can get buy-in from residents. I also think working closely with residents associations, because there are funding streams specifically for leaseholders, for example, and one of my offices is working with the residents association to see what's feasible there. I think it's we're early stages at the moment to say what potentially we can do and what we can't do, but we're very keen to look into these things and where we can help residents apply for funding.
Councillor Denfield.
Thank you. This is a very, very welcome paper. So this question is not to bring it into a negative light at all, but I see in paragraph 45 that the estimate of the cost to retrofit the stock in the council is 187 to 306 million, which is obviously a huge sum. And then in paragraph 35, where we're talking about funding sources for that money, it doesn't look to me from the wording in that paragraph that we're that confident that there's lots of pots of money out there that we can tap to reach that huge figure that we're going to have to find. So will the council be making representations to government about this, saying that this is the kind of challenge we're facing, this is where the money has to come from central government, we're not going to be able to raise that through council tax and locally, so they need to bring something forward?
So, because my understanding looking at the paper that we're really just in the indicative scoping phase rather than actually working out real costs or getting to a point of approaching a strategy for dealing with that. Is that correct? Yes, I mean, they're very rough estimates, and obviously we're talking about it solely from a housing point of view. So centrally, those points will be made to government as required, because obviously it's going to affect all areas of the council and not just us in housing. Also, you know, we do have to bear in mind that we're going to have a lot of expenditure on the building safety element as well as green initiatives. So we do have to balance those things. But where we can apply for funding, we will, because obviously the more funding we get, the more we're able to do. And presumably, as we're doing other things in our blocks, including refurb or regeneration, we can take elements into account. So it isn't necessarily the case that it's one specific task. It's something that needs to be incorporated into what we're doing. Yes, so exactly. Once we've got that consultant coming in, we can then say perhaps in all our major work schemes, we'll consider X on all those schemes. So it will be part of the major work schemes that we consider some of those initiatives. Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in before I give Councillor White his second bite of the cherry? Hang on, just let me see if there is someone there. Councillor Dawson. Well, there would also be a second bite of the cherry, but go on, I'll let you in first. If you unmute.
Second bite, so let Councillor White go first.
Oh, all right, fair enough. It's all after you at the moment. So, Councillor White. Now you're muted again. Sorry. Can you unmute? You're still muted.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
Good.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, going really on with Councillor Denfield's question, really, and talking about the wider area of Wandsworth. Private dwellings, for instance, have no compulsion to bring their properties up to any level. I mean, private rents, which we mentioned, you know, they have to go up to EPC rating of C. So are we going to help those two sectors, you know, trying to access grants? I mean, the council are in a really, really good position, I think, to specify and coordinate action across the borough in a very many different areas, you know, because a lot of people are going to need some help in this. And also, you know, with the leaseholders, which I think we touched upon it as well. I mean, it could be a worrying amount of money for them unless they're given assistance.
I can answer the first point, but I don't know if others want to come in. But the most recent bid that was done, the bulk of that was around private housing and improving conditions in the private sector. So actually, the bid from social housing was only quite small. I don't know if O'Connor wants to come in and add anything to that.
Yeah, so the bid that we put in for the greenhouse grant is majority private housing, is for specifically focusing those in fuel poverty. And so my team, which was increased under the WES, is doing a lot of work looking at what funding streams there are available and promoting those across Wandsworth.
Thank you. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in connection with the paragraph 40 retrofit accelerator programme, which looks as though it would be quite helpful. And I really just want to check that the funding for the scheme is secure. I noticed that 50/50 is from the European Regional Development Fund, and I guess it's all not going to be done and dusted by the end of the year. So have we got assurance that the money's already in the coffers?
That is very early stages with that. We still haven't made a decision on who we're going to use. So I don't really have much further information on that. But what I would say on this paper is this is a very early paper trying to set the scene. And we will be reporting back to future committees when we have more detail on what we're applying for and more information on those schemes. That sort of semi-answers your question, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just
coming very quickly.
It's been raised. How secure
Yes, of course, Mr. James.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting that obviously the council has funds that it has put forward, which as a department we can bid for. They are capital funds, but today at the WES steering group, Miss Mary was there as well, and we were talking about revenue funding that we would be able to seek as well to assist us. So, for instance, with things like extending the paper talks about the RAP, where obviously advice can be given to individual residents. So those are things that we would seek to expand, and you know, it was a very positive meeting in terms of resources being available for that.
Yes, and without opening up the whole wider debate, I suppose the lesson of last year was that we should always wait to see if a deal is struck, no matter how unlikely it may look from the outside. I think if everyone is okay with this, I'm going to move on because we do have a rather full agenda, and I'm aware that some of the other papers are going to need quite a bit of debate. So I think if there are no objections to moving on at this stage, I would ask the committee whether it supports the recommendation in paragraph 2. Is that mutually acceptable? Excellent. Excellent. Good. Right. In which case we move on to item 6, the Regeneration Update Report on Winstanley York Road. Councillor Belson has requested to speak on this item as the ward councillor, and I'm minded to heed that request and allow him to speak to the committee, assuming everyone is happy with that. And the lead officer, Mr. Morris, will now say a few words to introduce the paper, and then I'll let Councillor Belson come in, and then we will turn to the committee if that is acceptable. So, Mr. Morris.
Thank you. This is the first part of the report is just an update on the regeneration as it's going. Firstly, on phase 0, which was a development down on Land North of Grant Road. The first couple of buildings there are nearing completion now. The church and college, replaced Battersea Baptist Church and the new Thames Christian College are not going to be complete until later in till early next year, along with the new Muga. But the first two buildings are very near to complete, and Block A, which is now called Mitchell House, which contains 46 social rent and shared equity flats, should be finished next month, we hope. It's just really highways works to finish off now, and the first residents have been round there to see their new flats, which has there's some pictures within some of the appendices of the new building, and they seem to have been very keen on what they've seen. The next recommendation on there is around a small change that's been proposed to the disturbance payments that we make for people when they actually make their moves. This is really to pay people upfront their disturbance costs for white goods, etc., rather than paying on invoice, which always leaves people a bit out of pocket. There's an update on the engagement programme that's been continuing in the area. And I think the main point there is just to report on something that we now, the joint venture has formed a sort of longer term partnership with the big local and the Alliance to work with key voluntary groups really, and hopefully to build a long term sort of projects with them. As part of that report, I think that Mrs. Price will be has raised an issue with me that the second part of the report rather gives the impression that during COVID that we funded Waste Not, Want Not, Battersea. That I think is if it gives that impression that it's incorrect. The council actually allowed Waste Not, Want Not to go into Platform 1, which was negotiated along with the big local to run food support works, but they're not being funded directly. But we did, during COVID, divert some of the money, which is the advantage of having a long-term partnership, really. We were able to divert some of the money short-term towards big local stuff that they wanted to do for COVID support. The next recommendation on there is around, there's a small change to the contractor procurement. You may recall we came to the committee in January about this for constructing Block 5. Really for a request to move away a bit from the joint venture legal agreement in the way that the contractors were procured. There have been continuing discussions on this, and actually it's moved back more towards what the legal agreement is, but because we got agreement to it last time, we probably need to get agreement to it to move back. So we're happier with the position, I think, and that will be delivered by Taylor Wimpey. The final point sits around Block 5, which is the first lot to be constructed in this, the first in the main site, and as part of the application that went to Planning Applications Committee in January of this year. So the intention was that this block contained 2 cores of council accommodation of 71 units and 1 core of shared ownership. The council, though, does have the right to take to negotiate to purchase any of the affordable within the scheme. So the request is to the recommendation is that we actually serve the notice on the joint venture and say that we do want to purchase the shared ownership block as well. I think that's basically a benefit if that ends up as being council owned, as opposed to being owned by a separate RP. There is an amendment suggested to the recommendation on this in further legal advice we've received on the actual JV agreement. It reveals that we have the ability to either purchase that at a fixed cost or to actually purchase it at a build cost, in effect. Now, it's not entirely clear whether we have both options of that. So what we want to do is to explore that further and basically negotiate the best deal out of that. But all I'm doing here is to just adapt the recommendation a little bit more to make it clear that either that fixed cost or build cost, that turns out to be what the legal agreement does allow us to do. So it's just giving myself a bit more flexibility for those negotiations at the moment. We will come back in any case to the committee in hopefully in November, with an actual price and a method under which that will be purchased. In any case, I think it's better for that block to be council owned if we can achieve it, and that's the purpose of the recommendation on there. Further to that, I would want to explore whether it's possible to use that block, if it was owned by the council, to accommodate the residents from Penge House. You may recall that we came to the last January to talk about Penge House and Inkster House, both of which do require decanting in the medium to longer term, it was agreed that those would be decanted into the additional properties that are built as part of the regeneration scheme. That is quite late. I mean, that's about 10 years away to happen. If the Penge House residents were relatively comfortable with moving to this block, which is very close to where their existing block is, then that would bring forward their decant by 6 years. So all we're asking for here in those terms is to say, well, we'd like to go out and talk to them and see what their view is about it, because that would be a new issue for them. We think they could fit into that building and fit into that building, meeting their current housing needs. So we would like to explore that possibility. The only actual, that's not being recommended now, the only actual recommended at the moment is that we go out and negotiate with the joint venture to acquire that building.
Okay, so
the wording that I'm now using is to deliver that building.
Yeah, so just for clarity on this, the wording basically leaves all options open, but the reason to make the amendment is to enable those options to be open, to enable Penge House and other things to be looked at, but no decisions have been taken on that at this stage, and the amendment just provides that flexibility. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, we'll need to come back for confirmation of those decisions anyway. Yeah, and yeah,
indeed.
November,
okay.
Yeah.
That's great. So the members of the committee should have received that amendment. So I will come now to Councillor Belton and allow him to address the committee before we then turn to the rest. So Councillor Belton.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I think I can speak on behalf of Councillors Hogg and Stock as well. We're pretty much in agreement on the whole thing. I wanted to cover two things essentially. One, what it feels like on the estate, what it's like on the estate, and two, the item just being discussed by Mr. Morris, that is Block 5A. First of all, the estate and around it. For some reason or other, the report never ever mentions 6 houses built in Roditch Lane, which are the first units where people would be counted. And people moved into those, 6 families moved into those blocks, those houses very recently, and I visited 2 of them in the last month. They're absolutely delighted. They've been living in Pennethorne House, which for those avid canvassers amongst you would know why they're absolutely delighted to be rehoused on Roditch. What we'd thought of right from the beginning was that we could improve the living conditions massively for council tenants, and on the basis of those families, that's very much the case. Last week, Councillor Hogg and I went round Mitchell House, which is the one on page 80 and 81 of your folders, and is the one on Plough Road, and that's for council tenants, maybe leaseholders as well. That doesn't really matter to me right at the moment at this stage. And Duval House, which is the large one on page 62, which, if I can put it in these terms, is the cash cow of the estate, where the money comes in from sales to pay for much of the rest of the work being done. They're both, we thought, Councillor Hogg and I both thought they were exceptionally good. we were particularly taken in Mitchell House, which has been designed with individual tenants in mind. We were particularly taken with a unit for a disabled family where the mother is in a wheelchair and operates at various heights, and by a switch of a button she can lower or raise to the appropriate height all the kitchen units. It's simply fantastic, superb stuff. So I'm really pleased with that, and it looks good. We also went round the school and chapel, by the way, but that doesn't affect the housing committees so much. So I'm sure it's been a good move, and I'm sure that the residents like it a great deal. I want to say one thing, though, about Mr. Morris, who's just been talking, and Charlotte Haley in particular, as the two of them lead an officers team, which have done a fantastic job in bringing people on board. I think Charlotte Haley knows the individual circumstances and housing requirements of all 600 odd tenants and leaseholders on the estate, does a great job, very much relying on them. But finally, I want to move on to Block 5A. This is the Penge House place. Sorry, not the Penge House. The possible decant for Penge House. Penge House, which I won't bore you with all the details, but has very difficult problems with windows and wind. Also happens to be massively overcrowded. It's probably the most overcrowded council block I know. And the possibility that Block 5A can be bought by the council, and hence putting the misery that some of these people lived in for years and at the moment a timetable to live in for the next few years, to bring that forward seems tremendous to me. And I think the reason we've been able to do that is that the team, the Regeneration team, and I think the three councillors have worked together in a very positive way, wanting and ensuring that the regeneration goes ahead. And I think the gain for the council, the 65 units that might come from this particular block 5A, is a signifier of how well the council has been working on this, and I think of the officers' confidence in that they can proceed and improve life for others, people living on the Winstanley estate. By the way, it's not the Winstanley estate. The Winstanley estate is a perfectly respectable estate, which gets much bad news. This is actually York Road Stage 2, the estate. Winstanley's fine. Just to put that in as a side.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. So I will turn now to questions from the committee, but if Councillor Belton wishes to stay logged in and with his microphone ready, I will let him back as well at the end if he wishes to say anything else. I think Councillor McDermott was first.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's very, very interesting hearing Councillor Belton's input there, because, you know, he's there on the ground. It really, really, really matters to his residents. So that's excellent to hear that. I was just going to ask about the what's happening about the GLA and getting through the next planning stage, because there's so much positive stuff going on here. When are we expecting something from the GLA? I suppose that's a question we're always asking. I mean, it seems to be 3 months out of time already. What are we doing to push them?
Thank you.
Yes, as I think I highlighted in the report, it's more than the time that we have targeted for that agreement. We are. I mean, it is a very large application, and we are continuing basically to press them on the negotiations as much as we can at the moment. And I think that's all we can do, is to continue to adapt and move towards that. I mean, it's made. The application is made by the joint venture, which means that there are always two parties that need to agree our return to them. Currently, I mean, I said in there that the impact on the programme can't be directly affected, directly assessed at the moment, because we don't have the permission. I mean, the current position is that the impact on the programme is not disastrous, I should say. I mean, I think we've still got, if we can get this through relatively quickly, then the other arrangements shouldn't hold up buildings coming forward for the next stage. But I think all we can do is press them and continue to negotiate and see if we can get to an answer as swiftly as we can, really.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. I mean, I just think there's such a good chunk of social housing coming that the Mayor really should be very aware of that and get cracking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wintle.
Thank you. So just kind of picking up on some of what Councillor Belton said, obviously, you know, engagement on the scheme so far in the community engagement has been really strong. But my question was really around, obviously, COVID has really put some challenges in place in terms of how we can get together with the community, how officers can meet people. And given the fact that it looks like, you know, restrictions are going to be in place for who knows how long, what our kind of plans were for engagement going forward in that environment, especially when, you know, we can't rely on people having online access, and I don't know about, you know, the possibilities of getting together with people face to face. Thank you.
Mr. Morris.
I don't know if that was just me, but I didn't. Apologies, but I'm not sure I got the whole of that question. But if you,
if it would help, so I think it was just about asking about, because of the difficulties with coronavirus and the difficulties of holding in-person meetings or consultation events and so on, what we're doing to facilitate appropriate engagement by other means and to get round those issues.
Yeah, well, it is, as I think the councillor noted, it is very difficult at the moment. We are looking, where possible, do stuff either online or through. We did have a few drop-ins at the office, but that was with seating people sort of on the edge of the office, which will, as in on right at the front door, which I think will become more and more difficult as the weather gets colder. I think at the moment we're working through what we can actually do in terms of making that work. In terms of the visits to Block A over the last couple of weeks, they've had to be spread out an awful lot further. And, you know, it's been limited amount of people who can go into the building to show people around. And it's just taken an awful lot longer. But I think as we know, it's the position changes on a regular basis. We're working. I think the truth is on that, we're working through how we're going to handle it. Something like Assemble and Join is something we would love to get up and running again, but at the moment that's in an enclosed space with work groups. It's just not proving quite possible. But we will come up with a programme. So perhaps if I come back in November on that, because we've got to come back anyway to report on other things and perhaps give a bit more detail, and we'll see what the position is by that stage.
Yeah, I think if we could put a paragraph in the report that we get, then that would help.
And thank you for the effort you're putting in as well to that side of things.
Thank you. I think Councillor Forbes was next.
Hi, just regarding paragraph 43 on page 40 on the equality impact needs analysis. I was glad to see that there were 5 positive impacts listed. But I don't know if it's just me, but I couldn't seem to see anywhere in the papers that there was a breakdown of the equality impact needs analysis. There's also 1 neutral impact. I was wondering whether we could get sight of this to actually be aware of what's happened.
Understood. I mean, I presume it's because that we haven't broken it down entirely because it's some purposes of the report.
Yes. I mean, you can. I mean, I think. Sorry. What I think, what the paper was saying was that the needs analysis was undertaken for the previous decisions, and that what we've done now is looked at that and said there are no significant changes for these decisions here. So they were attached to the previous report, which would have been the January one. And absolutely no, I mean, I can share those with you and talk you through the detail. Honestly, I cannot remember at the top of my head what the neutral one was, but we can go through those with you. It's quite obviously, as always, quite an extensive piece of paperwork attached to that, but that's why it wasn't attached to this one. Yeah,
that'd be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I just reiterate that because obviously, particularly for newer members of the committee who haven't seen previous papers, it's helpful if those things can be supplied by email or whatever to do that. And particularly with 5 positive and 1 neutral and no negative, it's not something we wish to hide. So I think Mrs. Price was next. Mrs. Price there?
Thank you. Yes. So I was just unmuting myself. Thank you very much.
Very good.
I just wanted to clarify. I mean, Philip briefly touched on paragraph 28 8 on page 37. The penultimate paragraph that's written in this report is totally it's incorrect. What has happened actually was the joint venture and Big Local had a 50-50 grant pot, which they use as a community fund to help the organisations, the community organisations in Battersea over the COVID fund. And as this housing, we helped 3 accredited residents association to assist their shielded and vulnerable residents. We funded over 20 organisations with this fund. Waste Not Want Not is not part of Big Local SW11, and Philip mentioned that, but they are definitely not. It's totally separate from us, and we have no agreement with them. We didn't even know they were going to be in there. But I think the plans are for Big Local, SW11, and probably Providence House to going to Platform 1. Can I also ask?
Okay, quick. Let's take that point first. So I think the issues being raised is what's in the report accurate?
No.
So can we have a response on the accuracy of what's described in the report on that point?
Okay, on paragraph.
So if I can let Mr. Morris come in to answer that, and then I will come back to you, Mrs. Price. I promise.
Yes. No. I mean, except I think the point the report is talking about what the joint venture has done rather than Big Local. It is absolutely a joint fund between the two, and it was pointing out that the joint venture had been able to do this and contribute to it. And really, all the joint venture was doing, helping to fund Big Local to deliver these things. It wasn't the joint venture that delivered these at all. So Mrs. Price's point is correct. So similarly with Waste Not Want Not, that was that the council made a move to offer them what was an empty building at Platform 1 that used to be used as a cafe, and really it seemed logical at the time to let them go in there. That's a different thing to funding them going forward, and we will reach an agreement with Big Local, led really by Providence House, to take that property after that. But that's a future decision for the council to make.
Okay, so it sort of comes under different headings, so it's not so much inaccurate, it's just different ways of looking at the same thing.
No, the wording.
Yes, although I'm happy for that to be accepted as a changed edit if we want to change it in the minutes, and we can agree that wording.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. It will already, as a virtue of having this discussion, be in the minutes. But if we can just make sure that the clear wording of what the situation is in the minutes, that will deal with any ambiguity or dispute about the report, because I don't think there's any disagreement in practice on what's happened. Is that acceptable, Mrs. Price?
Yes, and can I also ask a question on page 38, which is on paragraphs 35 to whatever it is. It's on Penge House.
Yes.
I am at a loss as to understand why Penge House has been chosen to go into Block A when Inkster House is the worst building. It is unsheltered. It's got the windows are falling out. They're the residents of that building should be, in my view, should have more consideration over Penge House, which is sheltered.
Okay, so I mean, I think the answer to that is as was described at the beginning, that is just looking at options. So there's an option, but there's been no decision about which is actually chosen. Is that correct, Mr. Morris?
Very much so, yes. I mean, Penge House, I think really the condition of both buildings is much the same, Mrs. Price. But it is because Penge House sits about 20 metres away from this new property, and certainly as a first consideration, that would be where we would discuss. But I doubt that conversation would just happen with Penge House residents. Certainly, when we consulted with residents on this issue of Penge and Inkster, there was a concern that both liked their position, if you like, on the periphery of the estate, and that was a concern for both sides. So that's why I think we would propose to speak to them. Penge seems the most obvious. There's not a decision on that at the moment, and I think we would speak to both anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Dawson was next.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, delivering such a major regeneration programme through a number of years and all the changes is no mean achievement. So I was very pleased to hear Councillor Belton's commendation of the way the officers have managed to steer this, engage with residents, work, as we've heard from Ms Price, with Big Local, that I fondly remember from its early days in trying to help get that off the ground. So I just think as the committee, we should note what Councillor Belton has said and endorse it, because it is no mean achievement to get to where we have got to. And I think the cooperative approach that is evident in Mr Morris's sort of comments in the paper is really a template, really, for such schemes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Councillor Dawson, and I'm sure, unless anyone wishes to dispute it, that the whole committee endorses those comments from Councillor Belton, and they're very encouraging in terms of the progress that's been made on this, and we'd want to repeat our thanks to the officers who worked so hard in terms of the minutes of this meeting. So I think Councillor White was next, if his hand raised symbol means he wants to come in.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I mean, given market conditions for private home sales at the moment and problems with the shared ownership model and the need for more low-cost rent homes in the borough, I mean, we're going to see a paper later on that it does not make happy reading as far as that's concerned. Shouldn't the JV be more flexible in switching more homes to council rent homes at virtual cost price? And I mean, that might speed up the GLA approval as well.
Okay, do we have a response on that?
Well, I think that any move to change the position of the agreement that was reached in 2017 with the joint venture, and to change the position as stated in the planning application, which was approved by the council in January of 2020, will not speed anything up at all. I think it would take an awful lot longer. So I mean, it's a point that I think what we need to do is to try and work through what we've got and see what can. We need to deliver what we've got at the moment, and I think that is the agreed position that people voted on. If there are differences that need to be made to that over time, that's fine, but I really don't think that would accelerate matters at all if we change the agreement or the fundamentals of the planning application at this stage.
Yeah, and it's not actually part of the recommendations in this report, and it has been something that has been discussed at length in the past when we have had recommendations relevant to that issue. So, and it's probably not something to get into right now. Okay, are there any other questions on this item from any of the committee members? In which case, Councillor Belson, would you like to say anything else before we reach the end of this item? If you unmute, Councillor Belton.
I'm glad to hear that people are generally supportive. I've got nothing else to say if you all support the recommendations as they stand. I've got a lot to say if you don't. I suspect that you're going to support it by the sound of things, and particularly the recommendations that affect Block 5A.
Marvellous, and thank you very much for giving us your views this evening. Okay, in which case I will I'll bring the discussion on this item to a close. We are asked to support the recommendation in paragraph 2. Is that acceptable to the committee? Yep, very good.
With the amendment, sorry, with the amendment.
Oh yes, that is a fair point. There is an amendment. I'm assuming at the same time that we are all happy with the amendment that was circulated earlier this evening from officers, just to provide some more flexibility around that particular point. Is that all acceptable? So as amended, paper approved. Excellent. And thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Dawson. It was quite right to get that technically accurate. Okay, we move on in that case to item 7, which is the Autumn Estate Regeneration Update. I had a request from Councillor McKinney some days ago to speak on this item, and I believe she's online. Subsequently this afternoon, I did also have a request from Councillor Gilbert to speak, and I asked her whether she was happy for a ward colleague to go ahead in her stead. And I think I got a response, but during this meeting on that one. So my current view is that I am minded that obviously we have the opposition view represented by the opposition councillors on the committee, that generally speaking we've had one ward councillor per ward give their view on the regen projects. As I believe Councillor Hogg also gave his point of view as the opposition leader on a previous effort, but nevertheless, in terms of that. So I'm minded to go first come, first served on this, unless any members of the committee violently object. Is that acceptable? Very good. In which case, I will ask Mr. Algar to give a brief introduction, and then I'll ask Councillor McKinney to come in after that, just as we did with Councillor Belton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, my name's Andy Algar. I'm Assistant Director of Regeneration. This report outlines the background to Redrow's departure from the scheme and the Council's response to that. The termination agreement was completed on Monday of this week. The Council is now the applicant for the planning application. You'd be aware that there's a gold paper attached to this. I think everything bar the financial figures can be discussed in the open, so I will just run through what the other terms of the agreement were, and hopefully the committee will therefore be able to take a single decision without drifting into gold. So under the terms of the agreement, the Council now owns all plans, reports and intellectual property for the scheme, and has taken assignments and novations of all consultant contracts and associated warranties. The planning application is assigned, the Council is now the applicant. Contractual arrangements have been put in place for Redrow to complete the Bessborough Road development, and as part of the settlement, Redrow paid all the Council's reasonable legal fees in making it happen. In terms of the planning application, before the deal with Redrow was concluded, the local planning authority confirmed that it had received all the information that it could reasonably require from Redrow to be able to bring the report, to bring the scheme forward for a planning applications committee decision. There are a few issues that the Council needs to resolve with the planning authority as the new applicant, but the current expectation is that the application will be considered at the October PAC. Now that the Council is the applicant and subject to this evening's decisions, officers will approach the GLA for an introductory meeting to set out the current situation with the scheme and begin the necessary process of engagement with the GLA officers. So this report seeks approval to the Council's commitment to the current master plan proposals and by extension to the current planning application. Permission for Fontley Way was granted on Tuesday night, and this report seeks confirmation that the Council should proceed with that scheme, which is already funded. And earlier in the year, we started to review our approach to community engagement. Very often the planning system, or the natural way that the Council consults, leads to a very formal approach that's sort of unavoidable and non-negotiable. I think we were, we looked at best practice elsewhere and what others are doing, and spoke to the community for their views about what good community engagement looks like. We approached the Roehampton Partnership members for their views, and a range of other local stakeholders, many of whom were helpfully identified by Councillor Ambash. We had a series of 17 responses were received either in writing or following telephone conversations. So I think we've got a fair spread of what grassroots opinion is, and the key themes of that feedback around what good engagement looks like is set out in paragraph 25. So I think there's strong support for the Council's proposed approach, and I think this is very much about sort of one of the frames of the competition. So the proposal is that, subject to tonight's decision, we'll bring back a detailed proposal with a detailed action plan in November. In terms of next steps, I think there are three key challenges to the scheme, some of which have been alluded to in different contexts of the site. One is uncertainty over the property market. The other is the ability or otherwise to navigate this scheme for the GLA. And also, I think the importance of consensus, local consensus on schemes of this scale and duration cannot be underestimated. The market likes certainty, partners like certainty. As the first step, we'll be undertaking a soft market testing exercise to speak to potential developers to understand their view of the scheme, values and risks. And this will help inform a decision on a proposed procurement route, secure a new partner, and other steps to accelerate the regeneration. And this will be reported to the November meeting of this committee.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt, Chair? We would like to hear the 245A as part of this discussion, or maybe to have the discussion on 245, but to hear 245A straight after, as it fits.
Okay. Do you mean you're talking about the goal paper?
Yes,
correct.
Indeed.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Algar, could you just clarify for us exactly which elements, obviously without being so specific that you identified the precise details of them, but which elements of the goal paper we can discuss now at this committee in open session, and which we would have to go into closed session to discuss? You're on mute, Mr. Algar.
Apologies, Chairman. We can discuss everything in the gold paper apart from the two figures, financial figures mentioned.
Okay, so I think there are two issues here. One is that if anybody does wish to discuss those figures and what they are, I'm happy for us to go into closed session at the end of the meeting. But I think if it's just limited to those 2 points, it's probably possible for us to conduct the rest of this item, and unless people feel that the answers on those points would change their votes, have the votes at this stage in public, run to the end of the meeting, and then if anybody does want to discuss those two specific figures, we could do so at the end. Is that something that people are happy with?
We can do that.
Okay, and at the end of the item, I'll also, is it something that you do wish to go into closed session at the end to discuss? Because that makes a difference to whether officers log off the call or not. So
yes, indeed.
Okay, right. So we will let that run to the end. When we will have the votes on this item, but when we get to the end of the public part of the meeting, we will remain on the call, and we will then deal with any questions that relate to those two specific points in the goal paper, so that members can still ask those questions. And yes, Mr. Algar will just have a slightly longer evening than he was otherwise anticipating, for which we apologise. Okay, I think Councillor McKinney is online, so I'd like now to invite Councillor McKinney to address the committee.
Thank you very much. I'm just giving a brief history to the regeneration in the Alton estate, because a lot of people on the committee are new to this, and I think it's important that people know exactly what's happened in the past. So, as you know, I'm hugely disappointed at Red Rose departure. However, I would firstly like to pay tribute to the people who were bombarded at the beginning of the regeneration process from very lengthy, sometimes abusive emails and FOIs, and these emails were relentless from just a handful of individuals. So thank you to the officers involved over time: Johnny Moore, Nick Smales, Janine Newton, Chris Jones, Brian Riley, Gary Cox, James Wilshire, and now still Andy Algar and Anna Singleton. I would also like to mention Liz Rees, who I used to work at Wandsworth, who originally helped Jim set up the Roehampton Forum, and well before it acquired its formal constitution in 2010, the attendance was in very high double figures. The Forum and the partnership, incidentally, were set up as a part of the neighbourhood renewal, and my many thanks to Donald Roy for supplying me with the information. The other people I would like to thank also for their continued help in these matters are Simon Hogg, Tony Belton, Peter Carpenter, Paul Ellis, Jane Cooper and Steffi Sutters. And I would also like to make known the huge number of consultations that have happened since 2013. And thanks to Anna Singleton again for producing the handout which I had distributed earlier, because it's far too long for me to read out here, but it just shows the amount of different forms of consultations that have happened since 2013. However, I would also like to make a few points for the future. And the first point is over the two words support and object. And when we have a consultation, we have two areas. You can support or object to the regeneration. And as councillors, we officially support the regeneration, but we have our objections. But unfortunately, when you put into an online consultation that you have objections, people go down the I object route. So in future consultations, can we have I support, but with some objections, please? Have a further comment. Okay. I'd also like to know what's going to happen to the residents now who have been waiting for this regeneration, those who have been overcrowded for so long and have waited for many years. I'd also like to know what's going to happen to all the temporary accommodation which has been put in place whilst waiting for the regeneration to happen. Now, what's going to happen to all the temporary accommodation that's been put into Roehampton? I'd also like to know about the repairs which have been put on hold for the areas which were involved in the regeneration, i.e. Harbridge Avenue. There are very uneven pavements there, and I'm getting residents saying they're going to fall over, and there's trees needing to be cut back. But I would like to say Roehampton desperately needs investment of this kind. I would finally really like to say what I would like to see, as Councillor Belton and Andy Algar mentioned earlier, I would like to see in the future consensus, negotiation, cross-party working in positive collaboration with officers, as with the Winstanley, where my colleagues have managed to get changes agreed that weren't originally planned because of their collaborative nature. So the master plan is a good place to start again, and I would recommend supporting the recommendations in paragraph 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. I think Councillor Caddy wanted to come in at this point. Councillor Caddy.
Yes, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes just to say thank you very much to Councillor McKinney for coming along and speaking to us, and thank you for her constructive comments and also criticisms, and obviously we will take those on board. I think, as she said very eloquently, and actually Councillor Belton also said, consensus can be a hugely positive force. We are absolutely committed to keeping the promises that we've made to those residents in Roehampton. We're absolutely behind the paper that we've got drafted here in terms of moving this forward. You know, very positive about what we can achieve. We obviously have some hurdles to overcome, but the message really is that we absolutely want to do the best by the residents on the Alton estate and make sure that this regeneration happens as has been promised to them. And that's really my sort of key message. And I would urge members of the committee to support this paper, because I think if we can get some political consensus going forward, then it will hugely benefit the process, as Mr. Algar said.
Thank you. Mr. Algar, obviously you can't comment on the consensus side of things, but would you like to say anything else in response to Councillor McKinney's comments? Take yourself off. There we go.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, clearly any delay through, you know, reviews or, you know, looking at alternative options means that the opportunity to tackle those people who are living in overcrowded accommodation is deferred, and people live on the estate live in greater uncertainty. And I think, picking up the consultation point, you know, when this scheme was initiated, there was resident support was for this level of intervention. It wasn't for infill. You know, the council's whole consultation process was informed by what the people of Alton, or those particularly in the intervention area, were asking for. I had some analysis of the planning objections, because they're often mentioned. So whilst there's 254 objections, they're actually from 114 people or households, the vast majority of which aren't in the intervention area. There is no organised or sustained opposition from the people that will benefit directly from this scheme to these proposals. And I think, you know, echoing Councillor Caddy, we're committed to meeting the promises that the council's made to the people of Alton since 2014.
Thank you. Councillor McKinney, did you want to ask any questions off the back of that?
No, I'm just say thank you very much. I'm glad to see it's going ahead.
Marvellous. In which case, just as we did with Councillor Belton, if you want to stay there so you can have an opportunity to come back in at the end, then please do, because we very much appreciate your contributions. I think Councillor White has his hand raised, and if others that wish to ask questions could indicate so in the comments, that would be great. Councillor White. You're on mute, Councillor White. It's the curse of the evening, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay, just on the page, I think it's 122.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just amazed that, you know, didn't Red Row know that there was a two-tier planning system and a mayor who might recognise London as a housing crisis and want to see developments deliver more council rent homes?
That sounds like a slightly rhetorical question. I'm sure the mayor is aware of the structure of the planning system. Obviously, it's the mayor's attitude within that structure.
No, I'm talking about Red Row. It's saying that they didn't seem to understand that there was a two-tier system. I mean, it was in place in 2012, and the political office of the mayor was always likely to change.
Mr. Algar, would you like to say something on Red Row's expectations in this aspect, if it's possible? I mean, I think obviously we're asking you to speak on behalf of somebody else, which is somewhat difficult.
Correct. I can't speak of you know, put myself in Red Row's mind. I think, which I know, that is a very polite way of them expressing the view that the level of delays and perceived opposition for the mayor was a key factor in their decision from withdrawing from this scheme. Because they're staying in Colindale. They have largely moved out of London, but it was an issue for them, and they've referenced it in their public statements.
I mean, I suppose it is the reality of the situation that the consensus on this did last somewhat longer than 2012, and unfortunately, in some respects, and certainly in the mayor's respect, has broken down more recently, which is a relevant background for the Red Row decision. But we don't have Red Row here this evening, so I think there's a limit to what we can do in terms of interpreting Red Row's statements, and I'm sure each of us will have their own interpretation. I think I saw Councillor Senior with a raised hand. Does he have a question?
Well, a comment really. I mean, Councillor White is quite right. I'm sure Red Row did know that there's a two-tier planning system. That's obvious. I don't particularly approve of it. What they perhaps didn't realise, and I think Red Row were in over their depth in reality, and I was involved in this at the very start of the process, is the way in which it takes an awful long time to get these procedures through, with endless negotiations and discussions. It's one thing to have to discuss it with Wandsworth, where I hope they're reasonably reasonable, but then there are further and endless other discussions. We've seen this elsewhere, actually. The Atheldean development is the obvious one in the borough, where the mayor, frankly, frustrates a development. So although I do think Red Row were over their head on this scheme, and this is perhaps a bit of an excuse, I can kind of see where they're coming from.
Thank you. I think Councillor Denfield has a question. Councillor Denfield.
Thanks. I wanted to ask if there was a parent company guarantee or performance bond in place here that we could have fallen back on to prevent the lack of performance.
Mr. Algar.
As you probably know better than I do, Councillor Denfield, given your professional background, no amount of performance bond or parent company guarantee, which was in place here, will induce a reluctant party to deliver the terms of a contract. I mean, I think the report sets out the assessment that we made in terms of, do we wish to seek to hold a reluctant party to a contract with all the risk, delays and legal uncertainty that would create, or do we take a pragmatic but difficult decision for the sake of the delivery of the scheme and to meet our commitments to the people of Alton to negotiate an exit? The officers' views clearly was that the latter is the better approach.
Can I ask them, without disclosing the figures that we're not to talk about at this point, was that figure the sum that the parent company guarantee or performance bond would have secured us, or is that a higher or lower negotiated?
There was no performance bond. They don't tend to arise in contracts like this.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to raise a question at this stage? I can see Councillor White wants to come back in, but does anybody else want to have a go first, or shall I return to him? Councillor MacLeod.
Hi.
I can't hear you, so are you on?
Apologies. Am I audible now?
You are audible.
So can the council give assurances about some of the properties that are earmarked for demolition? That are not going to be either sort of sitting there empty for months while you try and find a new partner, or what's going to happen with those? I mean, it's already happening in places like Portswood Place, where apparently they're kind of being used as short-term temporary accommodation because people have been moved out of them in preparation for something that's now collapsed.
Portswood Place historically has been very difficult to secure tenants for those units. So they are not deliberately being kept vacant. We can't find anyone to occupy them. I think the issue, there's a point in regeneration when you end up having empty properties, and then the trick is, do you find meanwhile uses to fill them? We haven't determined the strategy and timing in terms of how this scheme would be implemented. But I think a blanket promise not to demolish anything, when I think the council could usefully do enabling works to de-risk this programme and accelerate the future regeneration, it's not something that I would recommend. So, I think we'll look at things. I would recommend that we look on things on a case-by-case basis, but I think the trick is with properties on a regeneration area is to look at suitable meanwhile uses pending demolition, and that's what we're doing, and I think the engagement strategy will drive more of that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I think Councillor Dawson also has a question. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Is it an appropriate time just to try and understand, in view of the comments from both Councillor McKinney and Mr. Algar, the consequences of some of the amendments being proposed, which seem to accentuate delay and etc. But I don't know whether you want to take that to a slightly different stage.
Well, at the moment, they haven't actually been proposed. So I will get to a point of asking whether Councillor White wishes to move those amendments, because it may be the case on the basis of what is heard that he does not wish to do so. So let us keep on with the general discussion, and I will turn to that at the appropriate point, if that's okay. So Councillor Wintle, I think, had a question.
Thank you. So, I mean, at the heart of this, we've got a lot of residents who obviously have been very, very disrupted about what's happening. And I think it's really essential that we keep, again, and it's back to the same point I made on the withstanding, that we're engaging with them, we're communicating them, we're talking to them about what's happening next, because ultimately it's their homes, it's the place where they live, and they should be first and foremost in our minds. So can we just have a couple of comments about what we're going to do, in the immediate and midterm about that, and about how we're going to, keep talking to residents and involving them?
Thank you.
There's no fundamental difference in the way that we engage with directly affecting residents on both schemes. So every resident has a case officer. We are committed to engagement. We will be ramping that up because we appreciate we're entering into a period of uncertainty. to be candid, there's a lot of misinformation about this scheme that doesn't emanate from the council. There are small pockets of people that live outside the intervention area that are causing uncertainty and worry to residents, which means we will redouble our efforts to make sure that the true message, gets through to those residents that are at heart of this scheme.
Thank you. Councillor McDermott.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from that, I'm not a councillor in that area, but honestly, I feel so sorry for the residents over in Roehampton. I mean, I think they're getting consultation fatigue almost, and it sounds like the ones on the estate aren't the ones who are responding. I don't know who the 17 responses you mention who have a huge number of issues, but are you saying, Mr. Algar, that they're mostly ones not particularly on the estates? They're people who feel they should be putting their voice forward on behalf of the residents, and perhaps they aren't. I don't know, but how we're going to engage with them going forward is going to be so difficult. But I do agree we have to, and we want to get this off the ground. It's such good news for the people of the Alton estate.
Mr. Algar, did you wish to say anything else at that point, or? I can't hear you at the moment, so I think you're trapped on mute.
Sorry, my connection froze. So I heard the beginning and the end of Councillor McDermott's intervention, but I think I heard the phrase consultation fatigue, and I think that does set in. And the feedback that we've had from residents is stop consulting us, engage with us, facilitate us to have conversations with each other about things that are other than the regeneration. So what we're trying to do is to create an environment where people have conversations for conversation's sake, rather than us bowling up every 3 months and go, what do you think of this? And sometimes we'll be in the room if people want us to be there, and sometimes we won't. So it's a very sort of different, more grassroots approach to what we've been required to do previously.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Algar. Councillor White, I'm going to come back just to clarify at this point. Do you wish to move your amendments, or is that not something you wish to do?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in which case, obviously, it's a very long amendment, so I don't propose to read it out. But I mean,
I've still got a point to make.
Well, I have a question for you first, just in relation to your amendment. Could people make sure they're on mute, because there's some background feedback there. So my question simply is, are you actually within this amendment, are you not, if people can make sure they're on mute, are you not actually saying that you're against regeneration now? We've had a long process where this has come to committee repeated times. We've had repeated votes. The upshot of your amendments is to say that we shouldn't regenerate, or we should look at options other than regeneration, which is obviously very much the opposite of what we've heard tonight from Councillor McKinney as a ward councillor. Is that what you're saying, that you're not wishing to go ahead with regeneration?
I want to continue with the proposal that I made. In response,
so is that a yes or a no?
Of course I want to continue on with the proposals that we made. That's what I want to do.
So the original proposals, yes?
But no, our amendments and our recommendations.
Okay, but what I'm saying is your amendment appears to remove your commitment to regenerating the Alden estate. Is that correct?
It doesn't say that at all, Peter.
So are you in favour of regenerating the Alden estate?
So what we want to do is to go to a situation where we can vote on it.
But I'm asking
the interpretation that you've made on it, Peter, isn't exactly correct. So,
well, okay, that's what I'm asking you. Are you in favour of regenerating the Alton estate?
I am in favour of getting what's best. In answer to the last question, to get the best for everybody in Roehampton, to all the residents. So some of the people who are making their representations are possibly some of the homeless on the homelessness, which is list in this borough, and especially in Roehampton. And that is expanding as we speak, Peter, as you know.
So
and the thing is, the regenerations, if you're going to regenerate, then you must make sure you regenerate for the best of the people in the area. Okay, so that's what we want to get to.
Now there are many different vehicles.
There
are many very different vehicles that we can use to get that way.
I appreciate that some of the detail is obviously something that people can disagree about, and you've previously opposed and put forward amendments wanting different levels of social housing and other aspects like that. But that's not what I'm asking you. What you've got here are asking us to pursue options to look at refurbishment rather than regeneration and other aspects here that would involve abandoning the regeneration programme as it has been put forward in its entirety. Are you in favour of regenerating?
The regeneration can take many different forms, and if you have a look at the amendments, it's holding that position open. What we're saying is that the council should reassess and do a better job. Now, the thing is that we can say, as one of the councillors did say earlier on, that Redrow were in over their heads. But what we don't want to get to is another situation where another developer comes in over their heads. So what we want to do is look at every possible proposal and every possible way of doing this, and don't get tied down to a master plan that has already failed.
But the point is that what the position we're in is that Redrow has pulled out. The council's position as put forward here is to continue with the planning application and to seek to find a new partner.
We proposed to amend it, Peter. Just get on with the meeting. Just get on with the meeting. We proposed to amend
very unclear.
You're wasting so much time here.
Well, it's because I haven't had a clear answer.
You're not examining me. I'm scrutinising you, not the other way round.
For the benefit of the
committee, I'm not here. When I'm in power, Peter, when I'm in power, you can scrutinise me till the end of time if you want. But at the moment, we're scrutinising you. So please move on.
An amendment is not a scrutiny. An amendment is a suggestion to alter our recommendations, which would change the decision that the council makes, change what that power does. So it is fair to ask what it means. But I'm clearly not going to get an answer, so I'm going to move on. Mr. Algar, you've had your hand up, and I'll turn to Councillor Caddy after that.
I wanted to make a point as well, actually.
Well, I'm going to let others come in, and then you can come back, by all means. Mr. Algar. Or if Mr. Algar's struggling with connection. Are you there?
No, sorry, I was struggling with the mute button again. Sorry, Councillor.
Yes.
I just thought I'd provide some context about the possible implications of these recommendations. So, as a loose estimate, if we were to go back to the drawing board in terms of the master plan, and then re-procure and then seek a new planning permission, if we managed to do that in 4 years, we would be doing very, very well. We started the procurement of the current arrangements in 2015. Winstanley York Road started at a similar time. So, you know, you're looking at probably pushing this back 5 years, maybe 4 years from a start on site. So this isn't a sort of academic exercise. This would be saying to the people of Alton, what you've been promised, you may or may not get, but you definitely won't get it in the timescales that they were saying. And I suppose a point of correction about one of the amendments refers to this complying with the New London Plan. The New London Plan hasn't been adopted, but is emerging planning policy. So the current proposals meet the current London Plan and the emerging proposals for the New London Plan. And I think, you know, infill and refurb is not regeneration. That's a major works project. So the idea that that's a regeneration that leaves all the community facilities, all the public open space, all the retail in the same place doesn't guarantee residents to tackle up residents overcrowding, doesn't guarantee a one move policy. That's effectively ripping up the tenant's offer for people on the Alton and saying everything we promised you, you're not getting. I think, you know, I've sort of urged council, I want to go and look at Mitchell House and look at the quality of the accommodation, speak to some people on the Winstanley York Road about what regeneration actually looks like in Wandsworth when we get it right.
Thank you. Councillor Caddy.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come back, because I know I sort of gave an overview earlier, but I would like to address very specifically the amendments that the Labour group have put forward, because, I mean, Mr Algar has eloquently detailed the actual effect that this would have on people's lives. These regeneration plans are designed to support and improve the community that exists in the Alton. They have been extensively consulted on. It's what the residents want. If you have a look at the regeneration that's taking place in Winstanley York Road, and you speak to some of the residents who are going into those new flats, they will tell you how much they value the changes that we're making. And I think we would be letting down the residents of the Alton if we delayed this project any further than it already has been delayed and will be delayed by the unfortunate, absence of Redrow. We cannot afford to delay this programme anymore. So I would urge the committee, for the sake of the residents in the Alton, please don't accept these amendments, because it really will just set us back by years.
Thank you. I'm just trying to work out, I believe from looking at this that Councillor Wintle and MacLeod wished to come in, but I'm trying to work out when the hands were raised or not. So assuming that's right, I'll go to Councillor Wintle.
No, that's old. I have no further questions.
Oh, it's the previous one. That's fine. Sorry, it's the danger of doing it from here. In which case, Councillor White, I'll let you come back, but it would be helpful to have some answers.
You forgot Councillor MacLeod there, I think.
If you do wish to come in, Councillor MacLeod.
To be honest, Councillor White has made most of my points. There's a lack of for me. Yeah, there's no point in me asking a question here. It would just be a statement, and it's already been said.
Okay, Councillor White.
I think that one way that we could do it, and I'm not suggesting that this is the way we would actually end up doing it, is an infill programme and a maintenance programme, which we can move to fairly quickly. And the thing is that we can guarantee the homes because we'd have more homes to guarantee. I mean, with an infill programme, you're going to get more than 43 council homes out of that. So, and that's all that we're being offered at the moment. So we've got many people, as I say, more and more people being made homeless in this borough, and to give up the opportunity on public land not to provide the homes that people need, rather than the homes that we've already got far too many in this borough, it would be a travesty.
Okay, but I think for the benefit of those watching who obviously can't see your amendment, it does explicitly say, which is what you just said, that you want to leave the option open for a maintenance investment and infill programme. And I think the point being made back is that is not regeneration. It is not regeneration as it's been pursued. It's not the regeneration that has been consulted upon. It would be an abandonment of this regeneration programme, and infill and maintenance is not regarded as estate regeneration by anybody else either. I think Mr. Riley raised his hand, so I will let Mr. Riley in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really on the comment around a maintenance programme. That's what you've had. That's what's happened on the Alton for the last 30 years. Millions and millions of pounds have been invested to maintain that estate through the normal improvements that we would wish to effect: lift replacement, new windows, door entry systems. But I think there comes a point, and I think we reached it many years ago, both on the Alton and on York Road estate, where ward members and residents and officers recognised that was not solving the problems of those particular specific areas and localities. Now, we do maintain our stock with a vast capital programme of 30, 40 million pounds a year. We do infill programmes. The 1,000 homes is effectively that type of programme. We've been building hidden homes for 20 years. We were the first borough in London to start building council homes again. But a more radical solution is what was called for here, and that is what we have tried to deliver, and that is what this scheme is. So I can remember walking around that estate 20 years ago, and I can remember walking around York Road at the same time, and ward members saying to me, Mr. Riley, we must do better than this. And that's what we've tried to do, and we're very, very close to achieving it. And I think, from a personal view, the residents on both estates deserve something better than simple maintenance and building, pepper potting some additional blocks in between the existing blocks. It will not solve the problems. It needs a fundamental improvement of the whole environment, and these schemes have tried to deliver that.
So before we move to votes, as we will shortly, because the time is moving on this evening, can I just come back to Councillor McKinney, firstly to ask her if she has any observations on what's happened, and secondly, whether she supports this amendment or not, given her comments earlier this evening.
I think I mentioned my way of support earlier, so I won't go down that route again, but thank you, Peter, for allowing me to. But I'd also like to mention thank you, Mr. Riley and Mr. Algar, for the continued, over the last 10-something years, support of trying to get some more money into Roehampton. And I'm afraid, I think I've said everything I've got to say, but I just look forward to a collaborative future between officers, cross-party and councillors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you again for coming this evening to share your views with us, which has been appreciated. So I think in that case, if Councillor White is pushing his vote, who is your seconder, Councillor White?
I'll second.
Right. So I think it's pretty obvious there's going to be a vote. So I will take these in alphabetical orders. So we are voting whether we're for, in favour or against the amendment en bloc as proposed by Councillor White and seconded by Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Dawson.
Against.
Councillor Denfield.
For.
Councillor Forbes.
For.
Councillor Graham.
Against.
Councillor Hart.
Against.
Councillor Lure.
Against.
Councillor McDermott.
Against.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Senior.
Against.
Councillor White.
For.
Councillor Wintle.
For.
My own vote is against. So could I just ask the committee clerk to confirm that that amendment is rejected?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The amendment falls by 7 votes against and 5 in favour.
Thank you. So we move to the recommendations as they stood. Will the committee support the recommendation in paragraph 2? Is that agreed?
We would like to vote for A, D and E, against B and C.
Okay, right. So in which case I will allow you to take this in part. So the committee, I believe on that basis, has accepted the recommendations excluding B and C, and we are asked to being voted separately on B and C as they stand. So taking votes in order, again, in favour or against of the recommendations to B and C, Councillor Dawson.
For.
Councillor, let me find the right thing, Denfield.
Against.
Councillor Forbes.
Against.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Councillor Lure.
For.
Councillor McDermott.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
Against.
Councillor Senior.
For.
Councillor White.
Against.
Councillor Wintle.
Against.
And my own vote is for. Can I again ask the committee clerk to confirm that those recommendations are carried?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the recommendations are carried by 7 votes to 5.
Thank you very much. In which case we turn to the HRA business plan update, and Mrs. Merry, I believe, is going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Fenella Merry. I'm the Deputy Director of Resources and I advise the Committee on Finance Matters. So this report is the annual Housing Revenue Business Plan which comes to this committee each year. it looks at all future income and expenditure projections relating to the council's housing stock. And this report, in its conclusion, confirms that, based on the latest estimates, the council's housing business remains viable in the short, medium and long term. So the details of the plan start with the budgets and approvals from January, when budgets were last set. It then updates the figures and assumptions for the outturn position from the previous financial year. And the table in paragraph 5 shows the reserve levels at the start of this financial year. The reserve balances have dropped since last year by £33 million as we've started to spend on the regeneration schemes, but reserves still sit at £310 million. From paragraph 6 onwards, the report then reviews the approved capital programme, which is listed in detail in Appendix A, and that programme now totals £386 million worth of investment in the council's housing stock and estate over the next 3 years. The table in paragraph 13 shows how that will be funded, which is mainly from a mix of reserve balances and borrowing. From paragraph 17 onwards, the report highlights the risks within the business plan. As you'd expect, a new risk has been added this year in relation to COVID-19, where we've already seen a drop in rent income. Arrears have gone up since the start of the year, and in order to mitigate this impact, we're bringing in additional temporary resource to help tenants. The rent collection service will be able to deal with individual tenants in an appropriate way. They could direct them to additional help. So, for instance, the financial inclusion team within the council, the tenancy support team or the DWP, and to encourage positive action from those tenants in arrears. We also flag in the risks the potential financial risk relating to the carbon neutral commitment from the council, which we discussed earlier. And as highlighted by members, the cost of this could be significant and we'll need to manage that programme carefully. There's also significant financial risk, as you'd expect, around the large regeneration schemes and the 1,000 Homes programme, and we continue to keep the costings of those under constant review. In order to fund those schemes, there is a significant level of borrowing already being assumed in the business plan. Because capital reserves are estimated to reduce, as shown in paragraph 21, we estimate that the council will need to borrow as much as £500 million over the next 10 years in order to fund its development programme. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. So I believe we have a question. Councillor Wintle.
Hello, thank you very much. That was really helpful. In terms of the rent arrears, it says it's one, it's risen by 1.7 million. Do you have any view of how many households that represents and how many how many households are falling into rent arrears? And I also had a second question. Please, can I go all in one go because it will save everyone time? The second question was.
I'm behind.
Okay,
you'll discover that I stick to this strictly with members on all sides. So let's take them one at a time, and I'll come back to you.
Okay, so it's a moving feast is the honest answer. There's necessarily a time delay with rent arrears, and what we found over the period of COVID is because we actively discouraged tenants to leave their homes to pay their rents. We know there are people that are able to pay rent but haven't done, so that's kind of mixed up in the figures as well. The number of tenants in arrears has actually gone down over the past couple of months. It's looking at the figures, we're on around 9,400 tenants in arrears. To balance that off, we've got about 4,000 tenants who are actually in credit. So we're kind of monitoring the position very carefully, and obviously as that position moves, we'll update the committee in due course.
Councillor Wintle.
Thank you. Thank you. That was helpful, and I think it's something that obviously as a committee we're going to want to keep a close eye on, given the current economic situation and the impact not only on the budget but also on individuals who might be struggling financially as well, which might not be for this committee. But I think everybody will be really concerned about that, obviously, as this kind of crisis is going to have long-term effects, which we all know, which kind of comes on to my second question, which is around the market values. And I think this is a really interesting one, and I would just be interested in your perspective, because obviously, as you were saying, it was going to have a massive impact on, you know, things like the 1,000 homes programme when market values are potentially very uncertain going forward. And I just wondered if you've done any kind of modelling about what the different impacts that might be.
Not specifically in relation to the COVID impact, but that is the iterative nature of what we do with the business plan anyway. So we're capturing revised estimates of build costs and market values at the moment, and that will fall into the next iteration will be January. So we should start to see those figures in the business plan.
Could I also very quickly come in there and say that in terms of the 1,000 Homes programme, we've actually back-ended the market housing. So in actual fact, the first market housing that will be developed for that programme won't be for the next 2 years. So by that time, we will have a certain picture, I think, of market values and where they sit.
I think it's also the case at the moment, isn't it, that we haven't seen a particular impact on our local property market, possibly because of the stamp duty announcements, but the values at the moment have not dramatically changed. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes. And as I say, I think, you know, it is very difficult to do modelling and scenario testing at the present time.
Indeed.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
I think Councillor White is the other one with his hand raised.
The other member, yeah. Can you tell me, Ms. Mary, what is the Public Works Loan Board interest rate at the moment?
It depends how long and what kind of debt you want to take. It's a bit like a mortgage. It depends on the terms, but it can range from something like 2% up to 5 or 6.
Okay.
Thank you. If there are no other questions on this paper, if anybody verbally wishes to interject, they can, but otherwise, in which case we are asked to support the recommendation in paragraph 3. Is that acceptable?
We've got an additional recommendation there.
Yes, that's true. I'd forgotten that. I can read this one out for the benefit of those listening, because it's less lengthy. It says, given the end of the eviction ban and furlough programme and the alarming continued rise in homelessness numbers in the borough, much more resources and capacity must be made available to control and reduce these numbers. Mrs. Mary, I think within the report there is a recommendation to increase some resource around these issues. Is that correct?
Yes, so as I mentioned, the rent collection service in particular, so to help council tenants stay financially viable. What I would just say about the current situation is I don't think we've ever experienced anything like this before, that the recession in 2008 was different and felt different. I'm not sure anybody knew what the word furlough meant before March, and now it's a really big unknown. So we've put some resource into the rent collection service. As a matter of course, this committee reviews homelessness and homelessness prevention budgets at least twice yearly. So that will continue. And I'm sure Mr. Worth's projections will start to pick up any trends if we see them coming through. And the committee will be asked for additional resource if necessary when or if that happens.
Thank you. Councillor White, in terms of, obviously, much more resources isn't quantified. So quantifiably, what are you proposing?
Well, what I'm proposing is what's in the proposal. So,
but what is much more?
Well, again, same answer to the last one, Peter. Can we? You're not.
So you don't know.
You're not scrutinising me.
Well, you're putting forward a proposal, Councillor White.
You'll find out.
It's fair to ask us what it means.
You'll find out. You'll find out when we gain power, Peter.
Oh, so you don't want your proposal adopted?
Oh, what? You're going to take it away? You're going to take your toys away? I mean, what are you saying? I'm saying, Peter, I'm saying, can we carry on with the meeting? And your part as chair is to facilitate the meeting. In the meeting, we put a proposal, a recommendation, and it's up to the committee now to vote on it.
Yes, well, unfortunately, the committee can't vote knowing what it means, but we will move to a vote in that case. All those, well, we are moving to vote. So if I take in favour or against the amendment as proposed by Councillor White and presumably seconded by Councillor MacLeod again, is that correct? Excellent. Enthusiasm for the unquantifiable. Councillor Dawson.
Against.
Councillor Denfield.
In favour.
Councillor Forbes.
For.
Councillor Graham.
Against.
Councillor Hart.
Against.
Councillor Lewis. I haven't heard that, so I'll move on. Councillor McDermott.
Against, mainly because I can't understand what it is, so I'm against it.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Senior.
Against.
Councillor White.
For.
Councillor Wintle.
For.
Councillor Lewis has appeared. Councillor Lewis, for or against?
Apologies, I had some.
No, we appreciate that there are technical issues on this, people being muted all over left, right and centre. So we're voting on the Labour amendment, and it's a question of whether you are for or against it.
I think as a huge surprise, I'm against.
Thank you. And I am also against. Can I just ask the committee clerk to confirm that that amendment has not been passed?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the amendment falls by 7 votes against and 5 in favour.
Thank you. In which case we move to the recommendation in paragraph 3. Can we accept that? Very good. In which case we move to item 9, which is the Housing Services Activity Update paper. Mr. Worth, I believe you're going to say a few words to introduce it.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And just to introduce myself, Dave Worth, Assistant Director for Housing Services. For the new members of the committee, a version of this paper comes to each meeting, and the forecasts that the paper reports against are adopted in the June cycle each year through a fairly detailed review of levels of homelessness, lettings activity, etc. And so we're comparing against that. So the paper details the homelessness position at the end of July. And as just to echo Miss Merry, this is obviously an unprecedented year. The forecast for the use of temporary accommodation over the full year was for a rise of nearly 400 placements, and over the first 4 months we've gone up by 43, I think it is. So unusual times indeed. The paper details the use of various types of accommodation, bed and breakfast, which has reduced over the period first 4 months, and the use of bed and breakfast for families. At the end of July, there were no families in B&B for over 6 weeks, which is a statutory criteria. The paper details, paragraphs 15, the position on rough sleepers, and members will be aware that the year so far has seen a very significant emphasis on rough sleeping work. And I just wanted to update the committee with the good news received only today and alluded to in paragraph 18. We've made 2 bids for funding, one of which is being distributed, supervised, decided upon by the GLA. We haven't had a decision on that, but expect one within the next week or so, and we'll update members of the committee once we have that. But today we received a decision from communities and local government that our bid has been fully funded. This is short-term funding for this financial year, and they've confirmed the council will receive the slightly odd number of £1,019,017 to spend this year on the rough sleeper recovery effort that was approved by this committee, supported by this committee last time. We're expecting, as I say, a decision from the GLA. I'm not going to speculate on that, other than to just update the committee that we've had lots of conversations, meetings and clarifications with GLA colleagues since the bid was submitted. at the back end of last month, and it looks like that may be, and I stress maybe, a positive sign that the bid is getting very serious consideration. But as I say, we'll update the committee once we have the decision. Paragraphs 19 onwards look at the lettings position against the forecasts for, one, the supply of accommodation this year, and two, how properties becoming available will be allocated across the housing queues. The headline position was that forecast is holding up pretty well. At the end of July, we'd received 29% of the forecast at 33% of the year, but that's masked to an extent by the new build developments that we forecast not becoming available in those months. So at the moment, it's looking fairly positive on the lettings side. I think I'll pause there, Chairman, in case members have any questions.
No, that's very helpful, thank you, and very welcome news on the 1 million and a bit additional funding that we've got today. Councillor McDermott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Worth. Just a question about children and families in bed and breakfast. So it's always a concerning thing when children have to live in bed and breakfast. I mean, I know we try really hard not to have to do it, and it looks like we've cracked it at the moment. But going forward, are we always trying our hardest not to have them in bed and breakfast?
Yes, I can confirm that, Councillor. So we're constantly on this. It's moving. So the families who are in bed and breakfast 1 month won't be there the next month, hopefully. And we do minimise the use of that accommodation for families with children where possible. Whether we'll ever be in a position to have zero is, I think, a very large ask, but we're keeping it at the moment in single figures, with nobody going, at the moment anyway, above the 6-week mark. And that, I can update the committee, is the position today. I checked early this evening, and we have no one over 6 weeks at the moment.
Thank you.
That's good news, and it's good to keep the pressure on. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Forbes was next.
Thanks. I've actually got two separate questions. So is it?
That's fine. We'll take one, and then we'll let you get an answer, and then you can have the other one. But you're on mute, so
Oh, strange. So just regarding the end to the eviction ban that will be coming up, I was just wondering more about Wandsworth's plan for that, and I think you touched on it a little bit, Mr. Worth, regarding if it is necessary, if there's local lockdowns or a national lockdown, regarding putting up people who are street homeless in accommodation again. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about Wandsworth's plan for that.
Okay, so obviously it's something we will be looking at closely, and members will appreciate it has moved significantly. So the moratorium on evictions was initially due to expire about 4 weeks ago. It expires next week. The key, I think, not the key, but a very important development is that for new notices for people in the private rented sector, the notice period has now been increased to 6 months. Now, by quirk of the legislation, that means that our duty to engage with the family receiving a notice who approach us remains untouched, because if somebody receives a valid Section 21 notice, they are by statutory definition threatened with homelessness, even if that notice has 6 months to run. So that is a useful development, because it should give us more time to engage with the families and look at homelessness prevention efforts. So I think that's a welcome development. In terms of how this unravels itself in the next few months, the government have announced that where there is a local lockdown, I'm not an expert on the precise details of what
I think they vary from area to area. So local lockdown is not the same in one area as it is in another. It depends on the terms that are put in.
But certainly the government have said where there is a form of local lockdown, then suspensions of evictions may follow in that area. So that's something we would look at. And there's also talk of a kind of Christmas hiatus on evictions. So that will play out over the next few weeks as the courts reopen. And of course, bear in mind, as the report references, there will be a backlog of cases for the courts to get through, particularly as hearings will be done in the main virtually, I understand. So all of that leads to, and it's slightly evidenced at this early part of the year, that possibly the demand that the committee approved as a forecast and the forecast for temporary accommodation use may not be seen in this financial year because of those delaying elements that I've just referenced. So obviously, as I said at the beginning of my introduction, a form of this paper comes to every committee. You will see the detail, but at the moment I'm starting to think that the forecasts that are approved might prove overly pessimistic this financial year, and any effect might be deferred into the next financial year. But we'll look at that probably at the end of October, and we may come back to the committee later in the year with revised forecasts. I don't know yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Forbes, your second question.
Just thank you for that, and just quickly, just as a potential update that we could have as a committee, should we go into a local lockdown, would you be able to provide like clarification on what's happening in those circumstances to all committee members? And then just onto my other question, do we not, and this might be because I'm new to the committee, do we not get equality impacts needs analysis breakdowns to see if and where there are particular problems across Wandsworth in terms of homelessness? I know there is some breakdown, but I was wondering why we don't have that analysis here, and if that's something that we could have.
If the place for that would probably be in the report I referenced in that comes to the June committee, because that is the annual review of these subjects. So we wouldn't necessarily provide it in an information report each time, but the June committee paper would be the place for that. It's not something we've done in the past because we're operating under statutory duties. So that report looks at the kind of strategic and structural issues, as well as giving information about what types of accommodation we use, where they're located, etc., etc.
And just on the other point about local lockdowns and updating the committee, I'm sure that you'd be happy to provide us with some updates if those circumstances did come to pass.
Of course, subject to obviously any guidance that might be around about the form and type and
Indeed.
Duration of such a lockdown. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Graham. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's fantastic we've got £1 million and a bit to go towards our homeless. I'm very interested in knowing how that's going to be broken down into mental health, health and well-being, public health, and also helping those people who have been on the street to get back into a property and get used to all the stuff of running a home. I mean, there's an awful lot to that. But most of my question is that during the lockdown, I helped a gentleman who has actually worked for the Dons, and he just wants to thank you for addressing the issue in the hostels where he was, and it was due to the fact that he was dry, he was getting out in life, but he was with people who were still wanting to drink and stuff like that, and he really did appreciate your sensitivity in helping him. So I just want to say thank you, but I really look forward to hearing the next step in how we're going to get our homeless back into the community.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So, I mean, just in terms of progress, because obviously we had an update at the last committee. Is that something that we can flesh out a bit more when we get to our next committee report on the next cycle?
Yeah, I would obviously, given...
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Chairman.
Yeah, given the priority and significant funding we've received, we will include an update on the rough sleeper work in reports, certainly through the balance of this year, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Hiya. Just a bit of a query on recommendation H on page 170. I know this is something that talking about sale of market disposals for residents who want to self-build. I know this is something that's been in place before and what have you. With the conversations we're having tonight about this crisis that we were already in before COVID and the one that's going to be even worse when we get to the other side with the economic, etc. It seems like it's a nice thing to do, to be giving away council land to people that want to self-build. It seems the same priority. It says continue to prioritise the sale of market disposals. Can you give us a bit of clarity on that? Why are we prioritising?
I think that's the next paper, Councillor MacLeod.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you've strayed into the.
I've jumped ahead. I apologise. Okay, put a pin in that. I'll come back.
We will come back to it, but we'll come back to it first, and we'll note it now so we can just go straight to Mr. James to answer when we get to that stage. How's that? Right. So I've now lost my own thread with that. Let's see who was next. I think Councillor Wintle wishes to come in.
Hello. Paragraph 28, and I really hope I'm on the right paper now because I'm now confused. But paragraph 28, it says the council will be looking to recoup such costs from existing and additional COVID-19 specific central government funding as far as possible. Obviously, there's been some confusion about what the government has agreed to recoup and what they won't. And, in the beginning, they said they'd recoup, we should spend what we want. And then there seems to be some backtracking. And I mean, it's all just a bit of a mystery to me. I'm sure some other people may be able to follow what the government is doing more closely than I can, because, as I said, I'm very confused. But I think the point of my question really is, obviously, it's really important for our budgets that we are recouping money we spent. So what actions are we taking in order to get that money from central government, please?
I can.
Mary, yes.
Yeah, I can give an answer there. So, as you say, the response at first to COVID was very much a case of let's do what we need to do, and the council came out quite strongly in that respect. Its reserves are at a level that actually we could be confident that the actions that we took we would be able to afford to take. The government has given significant amounts of non-ring fence funding. So, literally, if you spent it, the government would allow you to use the grant to fund it. It's also, as Mr. Worth mentioned in his area in particular, it's also given specific grants. So we've had specific grants for rough sleepers, for hardship funds, for test and trace, for infection control in care homes. On top of that, there's also a scheme of compensation for income loss. So local authorities have, to a greater extent in some areas, lost significant amounts of income from their services. So leisure centres, parking, events, those kind of things. The combination of all these together, plus potential losses in council tax, potential losses in business rates, we do think there will be a net cost to the council. And we're still going through the figures to see what exactly that would be. But as I said, the reserves in Wandsworth are of a level that we think we can cope with that. What are we doing about it? Well, we're putting bids in for funding where that exists, and we are continuing to work very closely with the MHCLG to really make them understand where the pressures are and to try and identify how much funding is still required.
So just because I think we are potentially in danger of straying onto FCROS territory rather than housing, but I mean, I think it's fair to say that the government never said, here's a blank check, go and spend whatever you like. But equally, it did offer support. But can we just clarify on housing in particular, what the situation is for the committee? So not the overall situation in terms of what's been spent, what might be recouped, but just in terms of housing. I think for the committee's benefit, that would be helpful.
Okay, so it's the same answer. We've got some non-ring fenced grant, and we will use that to fund the council services. So that will be, housing, adult social care, children's, and then we have very specific pots of money that have been bid for and have been allocated to us that are specific to housing. And the 1 million that's just been awarded is the latest tranche in that. So the combination, again, the cost to this committee of COVID will be funded by the council, either from receipts from the government or from its own reserves.
Thank you. Councillor Dawson, I was
just going to say, I just wanted to say thank you very much for that response, but also that, I think it's a pity we're having to go for grants when we were told to spend what we needed to, and retrospectively it's all done through grant applications. That's just a statement from me. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that, as I say, the Treasury is not in the habit of ever signing blank cheques, and I don't think it said it would. But let's leave that there for FCROSS, because I'm sure we'll come back to it. Councillor Dawson.
Welcome to the real world, but I'm sure we can debate that at FCROSS in June.
Indeed.
I'm looking forward to it.
I think it was implicit in your comments, Chair, in follow-up to Councillor Graham. But when we look at future updates, it would be very helpful just to get more details of outcomes with some of this rough sleepers, and what strategies have worked, what issues have had to be addressed, and how that work can be embedded into the future going forward, because for all the challenges we've had in recent months, it has enabled an awful lot of absolutely tremendous work to go on in a way which has probably never been able to happen in the past. So I think it would be useful if we could get possibly more of a feel of what the actual outcomes are of that work and how we can embed it going forward.
Yes, Chairman, if I could just comment on that. We're working on that information at the moment. Obviously, delivering the outcomes was, to a very large extent, dependent on the bids and the funding we've made. But now we've got at least one of those bids decided, we can move forward, and the committee will receive updates on outcomes as the year unravels.
Thank you. So I'm conscious that we have gone past 10 o'clock. The guillotine does still come into play at 10:30, and we have still got substantive items left. I can see Councillor White with his hand raised. Do you still wish to come in? Can we move on?
Well, yes, please. Yeah, no, just
okay.
Just a very quick one. I'm glad that we are getting more resources, and that was part of the amendment last time. I mean, we do need more resources and capacity for the reduction of homelessness. And again, I'd like to pay tribute to Dave Worth and his team for the Everyone In period. I think it's a big job, and they've done extremely well. But as I say, we'd like to see much more resources thrown at this. And obviously as well, in previous years, last 4 years up to 2019, there was over 9,000 homes built in Wandsworth, and only 5.5% of those were at low cost rent. I mean, if we had a lot more proportionally of those being at low cost rent, we wouldn't have such a problem now. So my question, I suppose, to the Conservative group here is, do they regret not taking that opportunity to build more low rent homes?
Well, as it's a question addressed to a group rather than to officers, Councillor Caddy, do you wish to respond?
Yes, I mean, I think we've gone over this ground many times. Our policy is to build the housing, a wide variety of housing that residents need. We have an excellent performance in terms of providing social rent housing. We're one of the best providers in London. We build many social rent homes. I visited some new ones that we are building as part of our 1,000 home scheme last week, and spoke to some of the residents who'd moved. In fact, some of the residents who'd moved in approached me in the street to say that they were absolutely delighted with their new homes, and they had actually downsized from a much larger flat, so they'd freed up a 4-bedroom flat elsewhere on the estate. So we absolutely are providing social rent and low rent affordable homes for people in the borough. But there's also a requirement to provide homes for a range of people. There are many people who can't afford to own and who would love to, teachers, doctors, nurses. I would like them to be able to own homes in the borough. And so that's why we have our housing for all policy, which, as the name suggests, we try and provide a range of housing at a range of different price points, so that we have a diverse population in our borough, and that we continue to live in a place that's a fantastic place with a range of people living here. But we have covered this ground many times before in this committee, so I don't propose to go over the figures again.
Thank you. Right, I think given the nature of the hour, I think we ought to wrap up on this paper there. We're being asked to support the recommendation in paragraph 3. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
No.
No, not agreed. All right, in which case we'll move to a vote. So we are asked to support the recommendations in paragraph 3. So after votes for or against, Councillor Dawson.
For.
Councillor Denfield.
Against.
Councillor Forbes.
Against.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Councillor Lewis.
For.
Councillor McDermott.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
Against.
Councillor Senior.
For.
Councillor White. I didn't hear anything there. Councillor White? I still didn't hear anything.
Against.
Councillor Wintle.
Yes.
My own vote is for. I could just ask the committee clerk to confirm that the recommendations have been carried.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the recommendation to receive the report's information has been carried by 7 votes to 5.
Thank you. We move now to the affordable housing paper. So, Mr. Jones, I think, as I said, given we have got to quite a late stage, we might dispense with the introduction and just allow questions. And we've had a pre-question from Councillor MacLeod, who suggested, well, I think the phrase he used was giving plots away. I said that would given them away, but perhaps you could come in and clarify that.
Yeah, well, certainly we're not giving them away, Chairman. We are actually selling them at a market value. I think there's 2 reasons really for that. A, obviously, much to Ms. Merry's delight, that we actually get a receipt, and we can clearly use that receipt to both maintain our existing stock and build more new homes. Generally, these are very small sites, so you can only get one house or one bungalow or whatever it might be on them. So clearly, for us, it probably isn't kind of particularly economically advantageous to use them for developments. So, I mean, most of the council developments we do can be quite small. I mean, our smallest scheme is 3 units, but generally we wouldn't really tackle these sites given cost. I think the second element, of course, is that we are essentially required by law, or not law, but by statute, to encourage residents to self-build. And I think probably it comes back to Councillor Caddy's point that, I mean, as a council and as a housing authority and a planning authority, we are obliged to encourage all forms of development and housing, including those who wish to build their own homes.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod, did you just come back in, or?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's something that does get brought up a lot, that, you know, we're having this mix of homes. Are the figures out there for that mix? So my sense is that the number of council tenants isn't really going up, but the number of private rentals by the developments we're building is going up. That seems like a change in that mix.
Well, I mean, it's again a difficult one. I mean, if you look, for instance, at shared ownership housing in the borough, that probably makes up about 1 to 2% of the stock. So we have a very, very low level of intermediate housing in the borough. Very, very little intermediate rent housing. I mean, only in the most recent years have we actually started to see development at any particular scale, but it's still only in the hundreds really. In terms of council stock, again, I'm gonna have to apologise because I can't exactly remember the percentage, but I think it's around. I mean, obviously the council has around 16,000 homes of social rent stock, and the housing association has around 10,000, and certainly that stock is increasing. So if you looked at the numbers forecast in terms of what will be at the moment London affordable rent, those numbers are increasing year on year. I mean, obviously, can I just say, Councillor McLeod, because there is a balance here. In terms of right to buy sales, you'll see that really the numbers again have gone back to a relatively low level. So, we're not losing stock in that respect.
But also on this resident self-build programme, I mean, first of all, the numbers are relatively low, but also the receipt from selling the sites at open market value goes back into the council's own development programme. So it's not lost, it's actually funding the building that we wish to see.
Precisely. There's also, I did want to mention, I mean, obviously the report also covers commuted sums as well. And you'll see that we actually, on some, often not smaller sites like the ones we sell, but some sites we will take a commuted sum. And I mean, those commuted sums are quite significant and fully reinvested in our regeneration and our development programme for affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody? So I think Councillor White has his hand raised. Is anybody else wanting to come in, or is it just Councillor White? Okay, in which case we'll turn to Councillor White.
Thank you. So page 172, paragraph 9. So inquiring, are the 250 affordable homes jettisoned from the Battersea Power Station development? Have they been put back in yet?
I mean, again, that really is probably a question for planning, but I'm happy to answer it. Obviously, there was an adjustment of the affordable housing on the Battersea Power Station scheme on the basis of viability. I mean, effectively, the scheme could not deliver the level of affordable housing that was identified in the phases that were identified. And now that remaining housing is subject to a review essentially at the end of the development. So in the final phase, it will be reviewed as to whether the scheme can actually viably deliver that level of housing.
So just for the benefit, just for the benefit of those who joined the committee and haven't heard these debates before, what we're saying is that it gets reviewed at the end, and if the review shows that more units are viable, then they will be included. And if the review shows that they're not viable, then they'll stay excluded, and it's up in the air depending on the market conditions at that time.
I mean, again, you will appreciate, I know that all of the committee will appreciate the significant infrastructural take that has to come from Battersea Power Station, which not only includes refurbishment of the power station itself, which has got significant costs, which have accelerated or increased. Yeah, there's also the Northern Line extension, where a big chunk of that funding is coming from Battersea Power Station. They're big takes, which means that you get less affordable.
Thank you.
So still only 9% of affordables on that development, and money being funneled to infrastructure projects that should be being spent on affordable homes.
So you're saying, sorry, Councillor White, are you saying you don't want the Northern Line extension?
I think I want affordable homes. I think I've made my position clear on that, Peter.
I mean, so you're against the Northern Line extension?
I want affordable homes. I don't want. I want infrastructure to be paid for out of something other than money that could be used for affordable homes.
The magic money tree that you've spoken of before, I guess.
I think
right.
ask for Rishi. He seems to have it.
That will definitely move on. Right. So are there any other questions on this paper? No, in which case we are asked to support the recommendations in paragraph 2. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Yep. Excellent.
We want the split. We want to split that.
It would be helpful if you said so before we move to the votes on these things. What do you want?
I said as soon as I realised we were going to the vote.
Yeah,
So
we just said agreed.
We'd like to vote.
We did say agreed, so I can move on, but make your request and I'll see if it's reasonable.
We want to vote for A to G and then vote against H.
Well, let's take it that A to G is accepted, and you're wanting to vote against the poor old resident self-builders, which we are legally obliged to provide for. Okay, so I will take those in order. All those going for in favour or against the item H and paragraph 2. Councillor Dawson.
For.
Councillor Denfield.
Against.
Councillor Forbes.
Against.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Councillor Lewis.
For.
Councillor McDermott.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
Against.
Councillor Senior.
For.
Councillor White.
Against.
Councillor Wintle.
Against.
And my own vote is for. So if I could ask the committee clerk to confirm that that item H in paragraph 2 has been carried.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, recommendation H has been carried by 7 votes to 5.
Thank you very much. Right, we turn on to the performance report paper. I note also that we have about 14 minutes to go, so I would make the committee mindful of the fact that the more we talk about these items, the less chance there is of talking about anything else, although I will take the gold paper discussion after the guillotine, so that will not be cut off by these. Okay. Are there any questions on this report? So I think is that Councillor Dawson with a question, or was that from before?
No.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just looking to see then, I can't see the hand raised so easily, so if people could put their cues in. I can now see Councillor White waving his hand, so I will go to him. But if people could put their questions in the comment section, that would be helpful, because it's harder for me on the iPad to see them. Councillor White. Councillor White? We can't hear you.
Sorry. So on page 231, under climate change, so the third option down there.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, I'd like to see an addition put in there that we so that we're looking for the SAP and the SAP 10 EPC ratings for the buildings that we're putting up, so that they are A rated. So, because we're talking about 35% reduction. Well, for the general public, it's a bit, what is 35%? I know the EPC rating for a lot of people won't be known, but for some people that's much more in common parlance. So I'd like to see something, an addition there to put in to say that we, the 1,000 new homes development programme, and so they would reach an EPC rating of A or B when that is impossible.
So are you proposing an amendment, because we don't have one on?
No, I'm just making the point. I think I can talk to offline really about that, but I was just making the point that I'd like to make it a little bit more clear about what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure officers are happy to accommodate a discussion outside the remits of the committee on that point. So, does anybody else have any points that they wish to raise, unless officers particularly wish to come back on that issue, if there's got something burning to say now?
Chris Jones, I'll get back to Councillor White.
Thank you. In which case, does anybody else have any points on this paper? Any questions to ask? No. In which case, we are asked to support the recommendation in paragraph 2. So can I take it that that's agreed? Good. and we turn to item 12, which is the lift monitoring systems scoping report paper. I don't propose to ask anybody to introduce this. Are there any questions on it, though? No. Okay. In which case we are asked to support the recommendation in paragraph 2. Is that acceptable? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Very good. And then item 13 is the petition regarding Willow Tree Close. Does anybody have any points they wish to raise on this paper? No, in which case, I mean, I'm sure that Councillor Graham would particularly wish to reiterate the importance of this item, but I mean, I think given the lateness of the hour, we'll move to a vote. So, are there for information? I take it that the committee is happy to accept this as information. Yes.
Agreed.
Excellent. Very good. In which case, well, we can move to exclude the press and public, which is essentially the same thing as removing the live feed, and we will then have any points that people wish to make about the specifics of the gold paper. So
before you do that, good night all, because I have to go. Yes,
that's true. You do. In which case, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you to Councillors Belson and McKinney if they're still here.
Right.
Good night.
So if other councillors and members who need to be in can stay on, because we don't wish to lose you from this feed, and I will ask, does the committee agree to the resolution being passed for the public and press to be excluded from the meeting whilst agenda item 15 is being considered?
Yes.
Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Right. In which case, I'd ask Democratic Services to end the webcast meeting and then confirm that, and thank you to those that have been watching.